Chapter 31. Talk. As expected, Ron was bombarded by Wayne when he returned to the lounge. Wayne loudly asked him where he had gone, since they had agreed to play ghosts together. As a result, Ron was anxious for a moment and said that he had gone to do something important. Then, under the flattering eyes of the little wizards and the questioning of his two brothers, he still told Harry that he and Harry had encountered a three-headed dog on the 4th floor. But fortunately, he didn't say much about Lind. After hearing what Ron said, Fred and George decided to go and see immediately, but were stopped by the angry Percy. Fortunately, Percy was there, otherwise they might have run into Snape and Hagrid. But when they asked about Lind just said that he went to the toilet and did not encounter a troll, but met a teacher instead, and was caught. Jane also used the same excuse. So tonight's banquet began to revolve around the topics of Harry, Ron, and Hermione until very late, and Percy took a lot of effort to drive the little wizards back to their respective dormitories. Linda was lying on the bed. He planned to have a good sleep today. He often slept in the water, and it was not bad to sleep in the bed occasionally. As a result, it was estimated that it was already midnight, and he was still not asleep. He just stared at the bed with lifeless eyes. Suddenly, a scream came from the dormitory next door. Anderson, who was sleeping at the window, was awakened. "Go and take a look." Linda got up and signaled Anderson with his eyes. After a while, the screams disappeared. Linda's dormitory was okay and was not disturbed much. He heard a series of shouting from the next door. At this time, Anderson also flew back. "Gugu," little golden retriever pressed little red hair on the bed and beat him. "Are you sure it's little golden retriever?" "Jane." Anderson nodded, and Linda fell on the soft bed again, saying lightly, "Awesome." After this noise, Linda felt a little sleepy, and fell asleep after a while. Early the next morning, the little wizards around were already talking about where the troll had gone yesterday, and about the Gryffindor wizards encountering the three-headed dog. Lind had just taken over the transfiguration of the day dropped by Anderson from the owl when he saw Ron walking down with his left eye covered. Hermione glanced at Jane and didn't say anything. Although she refused the idea of beating him up yesterday, it was possible that Jane would still go alone. Lind was very sure that it was Jane who beat him up, but he could only sigh at the temper of this little witch. He spread out Transfiguration of the Day and read it. To be honest, the content on it was still obscure and difficult for him to understand, but he could still barely read it and learn a lot. "I must find this guy." Ron sat down and said viciously. He was even more angry when he saw Fred and George's laughing expressions. "Fred, George, did you beat me up?" Ron roared. "We did think so, because we didn't see the three-headed dog you mentioned when we went out at midnight yesterday," Fred said. "But we were planning to beat you today. But looking at you, maybe this plan has to be postponed. After all, you're not very smart. If we beat you again and hurt your brain, Mom will definitely beat us to death." The two said in unison. "How could it be? I saw it with my own eyes." "Ron is not bragging," Hermione said puzzledly. "Who knows? Maybe it felt embarrassed to be seen by little Lolo, so it moved overnight." Fred laughed, and there was a low, suppressed laughter around. "It may be someone from other colleges. They may have got the password of Gryffindor and came in." Harry quickly changed the subject. His face was flushed, but to be honest, it was still difficult to hold back his laughter at Fred and George's teasing. "What are you doing here, just to beat me up?" Ron slammed the table. And on the other side, Malfoy came over again, as if it was his daily task to make Harry unhappy. He walked over and looked at Harry. "Did you peed your pants yesterday, little Potter?" "I don't know if he peed his pants, but I remember you seemed to have peed your pants that day," Jane said while holding a piece of fried potato. "Did I talk to you, Miss Devo?" Malfoy glared at Jane with a red face. Then he looked at her again. "I have written to my father. The people in the Ministry of Magic will never allow such things that endanger our lives to exist in the school. Don't worry. You can sleep well in the future, don't be afraid." As he said that, he patted Harry's shoulder with a condescending attitude. "I am thinking about you. I didn't see anything that endangers life safety, but there is a disgusting thing in front of me." Jane didn't even look at Malfoy, as if she was not talking about him. "Haha, I don't care what a girl says." Malfoy forced a smile, pretended to be very graceful and turned away. Ron didn't care about the wound on his face at this time. My God, is Malfoy crazy? The current Minister of Magic, Fudge, has long disliked Dumbledore. Fudge? Harry asked doubtfully. Yes, the current Minister of Magic. He used to be the minister with the support of Dumbledore, but now he really wants to pull Dumbledore down because he thinks Dumbledore's prestige is too high. In the end, in order to increase the credibility, he added, "My father said that he works in the Ministry of Magic." Linda rubbed his temples, lamenting Ron's brain, actually putting such words directly on his father in the system. If there are people around who are interested and write letters to report, then the Weasley family, which is not rich, will be even worse. But it's okay, there are not many people around, and they speak in a low voice, probably only a few people can hear it. He continued, if the guys from the Ministry of Magic really find out that there is a three-headed dog hidden in the school, Fudge will definitely use this as an excuse to make trouble for Dumbledore. Then we should tell Dumbledore. Harry said. As they said that, the two stood up, and then they came to Hermione's side and whispered what they had just said to Hermione. After struggling for a while, Hermione still stood up, signaled to Jane that she might go to the classroom later, and asked her not to wait for her, and then the three of them ran away panting. What's wrong with them? Do they think Dumbledore is an idiot? Jane also heard what they said. I don't know, maybe Dumbledore just needs this reminder? Besides, it's good that they have this intention. On the contrary, I'm more curious whether they know where the principal's office is. Linda turned another page of Transfiguration today and read it with great interest. This question also stumped Jane, she didn't know where the principal's office was. Maybe Hermione knows. She has already read through a history of the school a long time ago. After that, the two of them didn't communicate much. After a while, Linda put down the magazine. The things on it can only enrich knowledge at most. If you really want to study in depth, you have to read the textbooks. Think about it, the magic world has not developed for a long time. How advanced articles can be published in such a daily magazine? No wonder one of Professor McGonagall's interests is to criticize Transfiguration today every day. And Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration is their first and second grade textbooks. Linda doesn't know how many times he has turned it over, anyway, the pages are almost off, even if it is reinforced with magic glue. So what he lacks more now is practice. Thinking about it, Lynn took out his wand and waved it at the magazine with only a few pages. The flattened magazine began to change like a fluid, and the square paper gradually became round. After a while, a golden dinner plate appeared on the table. Its edge had faint concave and convex patterns. It can be seen that Lind was deforming it with the Hogwarts dinner plate as the target. Lind wanted to continue carving the details on the dinner plate, but he didn't dare to use too much force on the table to avoid accidents, so he had to give up. When the weather entered November, it became cold, and Harry's first Quidditch game would start next Saturday. But he didn't plan to watch it, after all, he really couldn't be interested in a multiplayer sport where the right to win was basically in the hands of the seeker. What do you want to do in the future? Jane asked boredly. Me? Lynn thought about it. What do I want to do in the future? If I can live until Voldemort's fall, what will I do? Undoubtedly, unless the magic world suddenly starts to explode with magic innovations comparable to the Industrial Revolution, it will definitely be more comfortable to live in the Muggle world in the future. But he really didn't think about the future. He was more interested in magic than in reality. He didn't have anything chasing him behind. At most, he could count Voldemort, but he planned to run away to other countries in the future, so Voldemort didn't count. I don't know, you can talk about yours first. Linda said. It's exciting to talk about this. Jane stood up and said heroically. In the future, I will let all the little wizards use the magic history textbooks I compiled when they study. I will explore various hidden places, discover the buried truths and make them public. I want to write a complete history of magic, not a history of wizards. She smashed it on the table, scaring Neville next to her. I don't understand what you mean. Linda played with the wand. Is this difficult to understand? Although what we are learning now is called the history of magic, it is actually just the history of wizards. The real history of magic is not only about wizards. Just like the Roman Empire, Ottoman Turkey, and the British Empire. Every era has a prosperous country. The same is true for the magic world. The fishmen once had the glorious Atlantis, and the fairies also had their own glorious era. Even dragons were extremely powerful in ancient times, but now they have degenerated. Jane spread her hands, looking helpless. Do you understand? I want to write the history of magic, not the history of wizards. I understand, but you just said that Atlantis is related to the Fishman civilization. Linda suddenly had some ideas in his mind. You can go to the library to look for it yourself. I don't know it very well. Jane shook her head. She actually only knew a rough idea of these. Chapter 32. Until the night at the Curse Club, things about the Fishmen and Atlantis had been lingering in his mind, and from time to time the idea of wanting to know about them suddenly popped up. Linda, what's wrong with you? You seem to be absent-minded today. Cedric asked Linda after the party. Lynn turned his head and looked at Cedric. Yes, why didn't you think about this guy, the perfect man from Hogwarts? Cedric, do you know anything about the Fishmen? Lind asked. Murloc. Let me think about it. I know that there is a tribe of Murlocs in the Black Lake, but I don't know the rest. It is said that this race also had a very powerful culture. Like the preface of the Book of Spells there is, I am very proud to be translated into the language of the fish people. Therefore, fishmen should have a relatively independent magic system like goblins. They seem to have been classified as the rarest demi-human species. Cedric thought for a while and added, there seems to be a book called Magical Creatures, Demi-Humans in the history category of the library that contains some records of fish people and their history. You can check it out. After speaking, he looked at Linda doubtfully. Why are you acting like this because of something like this? It's just a sudden curiosity. Lynn thought about Cedric's words. Unexpectedly, Cedric patted him on the shoulder. If you have anything, you can come to me. We are friends, aren't we? Then he looked at him with an encouraging look. Then he turned the corner and walked away. Is this? Do you think I was bullied at school? Linda thought about Cedric's expression just now. It was obvious that he didn't think Linda would let extracurricular knowledge such as fishmen affect his ability in magic. Curse Club activities. But the fact is that he was really thinking about the fishmen, so he was absent-minded. Because fishmen are not irrelevant to him. Thinking of this, Linda could only smile bitterly, but had no idea of going up to explain. There should be no need to explain such a trivial matter. At night, he climbed to the 8th floor of the castle as usual, and as soon as he went up, he saw a big bird. Because of the light, its feathers looked dark red. When Anderson saw it, it started to tremble and it became unsteady to fly. It's Dumbledore's phoenix, Fox. Before he could react, the bird landed on the armrest next to him, and Lind could feel that it meant no harm. It made 2 sharp cooing sounds. Dumbledore asked me to find him. Linda confirmed, but the phoenix did not reply to him. Instead, he nodded, glanced at Anderson, and then flew forward. Are we going back to the 3rd floor again? Lind said a little desperately, but what he was thinking about was why Dumbledore was looking for him. Do you want him to drop out of school? No, Dumbledore was a typical moderate. Werewolves and half-goblins were teachers, and half-giants were allowed to attend school. There was no reason why he, a half-Murloc, would cause trouble for him. What else could it be? I didn't do anything. Except for daily night tours that don't disturb anyone. Fox, who looked like a big turkey, flew in front, with Lind chasing after him. Soon he was walking along the 8th floor to the 3rd floor, where the gargoyle was in the principal's office. Just when Linda was thinking that he didn't have the password yet, the stone beast seemed to recognize Fox and slowly moved away to make way for a passable hole. Behind the wall was a spiral staircase that was moving slowly upward, like an escalator. Fox walked up with Linda, and heard a roar from behind, and the wall closed again. They spun higher and higher, higher and higher, and finally Lind saw a shining oak door in front of him, with a brass knocker in the shape of a griffin. The wooden door slowly opened, and Linda slowly walked in. It was a large, beautiful round room filled with all kinds of funny little sounds. On the table with slender legs, there were many strange silverwares placed, spinning and spraying small streams of silver smoke at each other. The walls are covered with old male and female principals snoring gently in their respective frames. Lind also saw the dam sorting hat and a cross sword inlaid with this big ruby. After Fox brought Lind in, he flew to a gilded perch and stopped on it. Anderson finally raised his timid head a little. I don't know if it bothers you to call you so late. Dumbledore's voice suddenly came out from behind the curtain outside. He was wearing a purple robe and pajamas. Not at all, Professor. Linda bowed to him. Yes, it's not too late for you. Dumbledore glanced at Lind, smiled slyly, and then sat down. Linda looked at his expression and felt a little thump in his heart. He now spends most of his evenings in the room of requirement and rarely stays in his dormitory. Although he had already imagined the scene before him, he really didn't expect it to come so early. Just as he was thinking about it, Dumbledore called him to sit down too. "Excuse me, Professor, why do you want to see me?" Linda sat down and decided to ask directly what Dumbledore's intention was in calling him here. As for the rest, he wasn't too worried. It is true that Dumbledore is a master of legilimency, but as a moderate white wizard, although he likes to set up traps, he should not be able to use legilimency against a young wizard. As for his night tour every night, it is indeed against the rules, but he himself did not do anything to harm others, so at most he would be deducted points or confinement, which would not be a big deal. "Would you like to drink something?" Dumbledore said slowly. "Butterbeer, please," Lynn said. Although butterbeer is called beer, it is actually just a carbonated drink, and it is a drink that is very suitable for chatting. Dumbledore took out 2 large beer cups, one of which was placed in front of Lind, and then butterbeer began to flow out of the cup automatically, and milk foam automatically flowed out when it reached the top. Dumbledore first took a big sip of the cup, and the milk foam was stained on his beard. "Actually, it's nothing. You know, I'm old and I can't sleep. Then I found that there was a little wizard who didn't sleep, so I asked Fox to invite you over. I hope it didn't scare you." Dumbledore's words always make people relax involuntarily and make people feel comfortable inexplicably. Lind glanced at the phoenix that buried its head in its wings. When it heard Dumbledore mention its name, it also raised its head and blinked its long eyelashes. "Fox? Is it a phoenix?" Lind asked curiously. "Yes, it is the only one in the world that is close to humans. No one knows where its kind is. I think your little raven should be able to become a good friend of it," Dumbledore said. Hearing this, Anderson shuddered. "It seems unlikely at the moment," Lynn said helplessly. "Stop it, the gap between high-level magical creatures and ordinary creatures cultivated by wizards is as big as the gap between humans and mermen." Chapter 33. Linda lived in a peaceful era in China in his previous life. He stepped on the tail end of the 1990s and kept up with the trends of the 2000s. In addition, his family was relatively wealthy, which also led to him having one thing in common with most young people of that era. That is to have a generous attitude towards many things. In other words, kill me if you can. In addition, he has already died once and has turned away from many things, so he maintains an indifferent attitude in most situations, but for other things, he is more insistent than so-called adults. To put it simply, he is unafraid of many people in this world, even when facing Dumbledore. The only thing he needs to be wary of is that he cannot act like Tom Riddle, who is as interested in strength and immortality. An obsession with things like lineage. Dumbledore will definitely be on guard against the emergence of another Voldemort. He intends to keep the rest as it is and not do anything like the 300 Tales of Silver here. Men should be generous in doing things. This is what he has always thought. Just be a young Muggle-born wizard who is deeply attracted by magic. Dumbledore looked at the child in front of him and couldn't help but admire him in his heart. When other children come here for the first time, they may be worried, scared, curious, excited, etc. But there are very few children like him. His eyes are not shrinking. He sits in front of him generously, without any feeling of restraint at all. Seeing that he was silent, he looked at his phoenix again, wondering what was going on in his head. He watched the child in front of him pick up the butterbeer, and the milk foam on it stuck to his lips, making him look like a little old man with a white beard. Not like a child. There are not many people in the UK who can be so generous in front of him, and Fudge has to be careful in front of him. He also remembered that when he visited Tom Riddle's home, Tom was doing the same thing. He does things calmly and elegantly, maintaining a certain level in many places. But his eyes are not that aggressive or have strong desires. Even when he is looking at the only phoenix in the world, the emotion in his eyes is more like admiring a painting. Not like Tom, but reminded him of another person. Himself. He was the same when he was young, ignoring rules and despising dogma. He has a passionate interest in everything in the world and knows what he wants to do and what he wants to do. "Lind, can I call you that?" Dumbledore looked at him kindly and asked softly. "Isn't that what you called me yesterday?" Linda felt like a row of dots had formed in his mind. "Of course, Professor." Linda looked away from Fox. "Haha, I thought it would be more affectionate to call me this." He smiled. So Linda, what do you think I was thinking about when I stayed up so late? Dumbledore pulled out a small drawer on the table. There are various kinds of candies inside. If you're not going to bed yet, you could have some candy. What do you want? Lind waved his hand. He had no desire to eat sweets at night. I don't understand what you mean, Professor. Lind took another sip of butterbeer, feeling a little confused as to what Dumbledore wanted to do. Haha, I want to ask you, what do you think a dying person would think about? Or what do you think about death? Dumbledore smiled. I want to hear the thoughts of young people. Maybe this can give some inspiration to an old man like me. He blinked and looked at Linda expectantly. The professor is so energetic, he will definitely live a long life, how can he be said to be a dying person? Linda laughed. I'm already over 100 years old. Dumbledore laughed. Forward. Hearing this, Linda wanted to slap himself twice, saying what he said was not good, and he said this. Linda was a little helpless. He probably made up his mind to listen to what Linda had to say. Why did Dumbledore ask this question? Was he worried that I would turn into a guy like Tom Riddle? He is so afraid of death that he turns himself into a human being and a ghost. He is indifferent to life but is afraid of death. Just tell me, it's okay. Dumbledore's voice was always so magical, and Lind unknowingly let down his guard. What do you think? Linda thought for a while and made some choices. Perhaps, Professor, you are looking back on your past, and occasionally you will secretly laugh at your achievements, and sometimes you will regret the wrong things you have done. Or maybe you're thinking about what else you want to do in your life but haven't done yet. Lynn said slowly, looking at Dumbledore's wrinkled face. Apparently Lynn's answer also frightened Dumbledore. He was stunned for several seconds before continuing. I'm surprised by the answer. I'm curious what gave you these thoughts. These are what my mother, Ms. Evelyn Augustus, told me before she left. She was a kind-hearted person who adopted many children, including me, throughout her life, and gave many homeless people a home. Last year she closed her eyes forever in the hospital in our small town. She told me that while she was lying in bed, she often thought about whether there was anything she had not done, and recalled the good and bad things she had done. Then, Linda rubbed his temple uncomfortably halfway through his speech. So I guess you should be looking back and recalling the past like her. Linda did not continue. Although this environment makes people want to continue talking, this is all he is willing to say. Dumbledore nodded contentedly when he saw Linda said this. You are right. Every time I think about my achievements in magic, I feel very proud, and I will laugh secretly when I think of my adventures when I was young. Dumbledore took a big sip of butterbeer, and laughed as if he was really chatting with an old friend after drinking. Linda, if there is such a wizard, he has a strange disease and will not live long, so he frantically seeks a way to save his life, and even commits heinous crimes and slaughters lives wantonly. Then what do you think of his behavior? Dumbledore asked again. As soon as he asked this question, Lind basically determined Dumbledore's purpose. There is no doubt that he was asking about his attitude towards life and death. He was guarding against the emergence of the next Tom Riddle. How to give an answer to the wizard in front of him? It is unrealistic to say some glorious and righteous words. Even if Dumbledore does not use legilimency on him, there are other ways to know whether he is lying. I want to give an answer that I agree with and that the white wizard in front of me also agrees with. To be honest, it is not difficult. I just need to work hard on the wording, and then add my external identity of being 11 years old. Lynn's brain began to work at high speed, and the wine glass in front of him began to refill automatically, while Dumbledore leisurely peeled a piece of sizzling honey candy. I can't accept the behavior of this wizard. Lynn said sternly. Chapter 34. Add some children's wild imagination, add some incomprehensible philosophical tones and then deeply deny the wizard's actions. This is Lynn's idea. My mother said that death is not terrible. When we are alive, death has nothing to do with us. When we die, we no longer exist. Very good, very meaningful, this sentence is the same as not saying it. It has that philosophical flavor. Lind continued, no one is not afraid of death, but he deprives and harms the lives of others in order to avoid his own death. This behavior is really bad. If it were me, I would definitely not do it. Lind said again. Oh, then what would you do? Dumbledore showed an interested look. I don't know the world after death. What if a person enters a new and better world after death? I think death is not that terrible. So before death, we should try our best to live a more meaningful life, right? He said a lot of words in a row, and when he talked about the world after death, he deliberately spoke with a little doubt and longing tone, which seemed like a child's wild imagination. Haha, yes. Death may be a new journey. Dumbledore laughed. Then their topic began to turn to Lin's experience and daily life after coming to school. It became like a leader caring about his employees. What puzzled him during the period was that Dumbledore never said anything about his night wandering, which made Lind a little uncertain and uncomfortable. If you want to punish him, just do it directly. He roared in his heart, but Dumbledore seemed to be unaware that it was midnight, but he was talking to a little wizard normally during the day. After chatting for a while, Dumbledore began to send him away. I think you should go to rest, and I hope you won't be disturbed by my chatting with you in your daily life. When talking about daily life, Dumbledore deliberately prolonged the tone and looked at him with a half-smile. By the way, don't let other professors say that you only care about sleeping in class, otherwise I will tell Professor McGonagall about your night wandering. He added. Then Lind hurriedly said goodbye to Dumbledore, grabbed Anderson who was sleeping soundly on his lap and left. After watching him leave, Dumbledore sat alone in the office, his bony fingers stroking the old wand, wondering what he was thinking. It is estimated that people from the Ministry of Magic will come tomorrow. In addition to Fudge, there will be people from the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. A photo on the wall suddenly spoke, and although his voice was old and hoarse, his breath was very strong. Thank you, Evra. Dumbledore thanked him, and then thought that according to Fudge's temperament, he might come early tomorrow morning. It's better to go to bed early. On Lin's side, after walking out of the spiral staircase, he decided to go back to the lounge. Although it seemed that Dumbledore should have acquiesced to his behavior, Lin still planned to play it safe. So it's better to go back to the lounge and rest for a night. The next day, Saturday, when most of the little wizards hadn't gotten up yet, Fudge came to Hogwarts early. They came to the room where the three-headed dog was reported to be imprisoned. There was only dog hair on the ground in the empty room. There was nothing else, no three-headed dog, no big iron chain, no trap door. Fudge and the people from the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures smelled the dog smell, but heard Dumbledore say in their ears, there will be no such dangerous animals in the school. However, they had no way to do it. If they didn't see the three-headed dog, it meant there was no three-headed dog. They could only blame themselves for being late. Now no one knew where the three-headed dog was, and they had no way to do it even if the room was full of dog smell. He was so angry that he could only pretend to be the Minister of Magic and give Dumbledore a few words and then leave here quickly. Because he really couldn't stand the way some people around him laughed at him. However, Lin didn't know these things. He woke up early and started his daily homework in the lounge. After breakfast, he planned to go to the library to check the relevant information about the Fishman culture in Atlantis. Dumbledore's night talk with him yesterday still made him a little confused, but he also roughly understood why he was noticed by Dumbledore. One is because he killed the troll that Quirrell brought to Hogwarts in a direct, brutal, and neat way. The second is that he is too restless. He goes to the room of requirement almost every night, and his charms and transfiguration classes are extremely good, which makes people have to pay attention to him. Although he has never been caught by anyone, as the master of this castle, Dumbledore has some of his own methods of monitoring the castle, which is not surprising at all. After all, even 4 students can make artifacts like the Marauder's Map. As for whether he can monitor the room of requirement, he is a little unsure, and he thinks it should not be possible. After eating a casual breakfast, he heard Harry worrying about his Quidditch debut. His first game is next Saturday, exactly 1 week from now. Wood originally decided to keep Harry's participation in the game a secret and use him as a secret weapon for their team. But the news that Harry would be the seeker was leaked. After all, the flying broom that was suddenly sent that day was really eye-catching. As a result, some people told him that he would fight well, and some people told him that they would hold the mattress and run with him to prevent him from falling. Linda had breakfast in this atmosphere, and then went to the library alone. Jane touched Hermione's hand and motioned him to look at Linda's back as he left. I don't know when Hermione started to compete with Linda. The little wizard's thoughts were simple and plain, why am I slower than him? And Jane was more of a spectator. After Hermione and Harry said goodbye, she hurriedly followed behind Linda with Jane. Jane didn't forget to stuff a piece of bread into her mouth before leaving. Linda came to the library. Linda found Mrs. Pants, who was repairing the cover of a book, The Journey of the Centaur Knight, and asked if there were any books about fishmen. Mrs. Pants looked up, and the serious look made him almost think that the book was damaged by himself. Linda had a feeling that if the books in the library did not belong to her, she would definitely not allow these violent book-reading guys to look through her little treasures. No one could come in before the opening time, and she would never leave her children here after the closing time. There is a book called A Brief History of Fishmen in the 5th book of the 4th row of the 32nd row, and Magical Creatures, Demi-Humans in the 9th row of the 33rd row. After that, Madame Pants named several books in succession, among which Demi-Humans was exactly the one Cedric mentioned. It has to be said that Madame Pants is professional. Hogwarts Library is the library with the most complete and largest collection of books in the entire British wizarding world, and she can accurately remember the location of each book. This means that she takes good care of every book here, and remembers it day after day, year after year. If this were in Japan, it would definitely be called the spirit of craftsmanship, and then she would be called the god of library management. Chapter 35. Linda sat at a long table in the library, with several large and small books placed in front of him. He first picked up a book as big as a novel published in his previous life. The feel of the cover is nothing special, it feels like thick animal leather, and the paper inside is also thick parchment. The main color of the cover is sea blue, with rows of huts vaguely painted on it. There seem to be some invisible majestic buildings behind these houses, which also makes this book look a bit mysterious. The title Mysterious Atlantis is written in a barely standard handwritten Gothic script. The name gives Lind the feeling of a marketing article, but this book is something he can see. Books mainly about Atlantis. And it doesn't have much content. Due to technical reasons, this book looks thick, but in fact there isn't much content in it. So Linda decided to start with this book. When you open the book, you can see the preface written by the author. I know that no one will necessarily read this book, and it will be difficult to even distribute it, but I still want to write down this story for future reference, or joke. Basil Elton. Is this an unreleased book? Linda frowned. No wonder even the title of the book is handwritten. Maybe you can only find this kind of book in Hogwarts. To be honest, he wanted to put the book back. But now that it's open, let's take a quick look. He had no confidence in the contents of this book anyway. He turned directly to the text and started reading. However, I couldn't stop looking at it. There is always a layer of mystery surrounding Atlantis in the Muggle world, and Lynn thought that perhaps its mystery could be revealed in the wizarding world. However, it turned out that he thought too much. It was not until evening that Lynn slowly closed the book, squinting his eyes and rubbing his temples. He has been sitting here all day long. Except for occasionally standing up and pacing around for a while after sitting for a long time, he has been immersed in this book the rest of the time. This book details the emergence of Atlantis and its glory. The author also tells some conjectures about its decline. Apart from the frequently misspelled words and the occasional words and sentences with unclear meanings, this book is worthy of being used as an advanced history of magic textbook. The content of the book is detailed, the context is clear, and the language is plain but very contagious. When Linda was reading, he often felt as if he was standing in that mysterious and grand city. The people around him wore flowing white robes and red leather sandals. If it weren't for the fact that the book was filled with nouns specific to the magical world, he would have felt like he was reading an ancient Greek history book. Holding book. Yes, Atlantis, also known as Atlantis, Tau Lambda Alpha Nu Tau Nu Sigma Omicron. It started in ancient Greece. It's as if the British magical world is now hidden in the world of ordinary people. In ancient Greece, there was also such a magical gathering place hidden among the city-states in the Aegean Sea. This is different from the current decentralized hiding in the British wizarding world. The ancient Greek wizards at that time directly built a safe house based on the city. And this city is Atlantis. It first appeared in the cognition of ordinary people when the ancient Greek wizard Solon first began to speak it in the world of ordinary people. Later, it became popular because of Plato, one of the three great wizards. Suddenly, a hand handed a lunchbox to Linda. As soon as he looked up, he saw Jane standing next to him at some point, holding a lunchbox in her hand. Goo goo. Linda's stomach rumbled unsatisfactorily at this time. For me. Lind pointed to himself and asked in disbelief. Jane nodded. You are really capable. I couldn't bear to eat at noon, and you can actually forget. Jane looked helpless. Then she put her things down and glanced at the other side of the library. She is just like you. I didn't see you at dinner, so I brought you some. Lynn turned around and looked over, only to see Hermione sitting over there, with the tall book covering most of her face. It could be seen that like Lind, her eyes were red and her hair was messy, looking like a tramp. What's wrong with her? So, crazy. Linda thought for a long time before he came up with a suitable adjective and opened the lunch box Jane brought him. Fried shrimps, fried fish steaks and a small amount of chicken are all Linda's favorite things. Competing with you. She always feels that she lost to you because she didn't work hard enough. Jane sat opposite him and whispered. Lose to me? What do you mean? It's the charms class and the transfiguration class. You finish them first every time. Then why doesn't she want to think about other classes, such as potions, herbal medicine, history of magic? Well, this doesn't count. After understanding what Jane meant, Lynn didn't care. There is nothing so perfect in the world. I just focused most of my energy on these two subjects. And I just read this book all day today and didn't study at all. I want to compete in every subject, and I don't know if she understands what she wants to learn. This is really tiring. Linda stuffed a whole fried shrimp into his mouth and said with a smile. Jane felt uncomfortable when she heard Lynn speak bluntly about her friend, but she couldn't think of anything she could refute, because she also felt that what Lynn said made sense. She shook her head and threw these thoughts out of her mind, reminding herself not to think about these things. Then she looked at the book in front of Lind. Mysterious Atlantis? Why do you read this kind of book? If you really want to understand the relevant history, you shouldn't read this kind of nonsense. She thought of the question Lind asked her yesterday morning. Have you read it? Lind bit a piece of chicken. I read it a few weeks ago. The whole article is just some stories. I almost wanted to help this author submit it to the Wizard Novel Publishing House. In this way, there should still be a chance to publish it. Jane smiled. Lind's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that I read a storybook for a day? How do you know that what he wrote is all nonsense? Didn't you say yesterday that you didn't know much about this period of history? Yes, but this book is definitely full of nonsense. You read it yourself. There are either typos or some unclear sentences or symbols. When you ask me about knowledge points, can I still tell you that I read a novel and it said something like this? And why am I so sure? Because what is written here violates the theory of development. We are human beings. Our most powerful weapon is our brain. Then you tell me that a city that has existed for thousands of years has better magic development than it does now. Is this possible? Reality is not a novel. The wheel of history rolls forward, and we are always developing. How can the plot in the novel that the older the stronger is possible appear? She spoke louder and louder. What are you arguing about? This is a library. Mrs. Pants came to her side at some point and stared at her with murderous eyes. Why are you yelling so loudly? Lind could only look at Jane helplessly and said in a low voice. Chapter 36. Jane was also startled by the sudden appearance of Madame Pants, and then she realized that she was still in the library. Hermione looked at this side with a worried look. Jane couldn't say a word for a long time, her face flushed. I think you have disturbed a lot of people. Madame Pants's words were squeezed out from her teeth. Sorry, Madame Pants, we will leave now. As she said that, Linda pulled Jane's sleeve. By the way, Madam, I want to borrow this book. He put away the lunch box that Jane brought for him. Then he picked up the book Mysterious Atlantis. Then Linda stuffed the lunch box to Jane, who was a little confused, and put the books back in place one by one. He put the books next to their respective bookcases, and then these books would automatically return to their original positions as if they were attracted. In less than a minute, he put all the books back. At this time, Madame Pants had returned to the door of the library again. She continued to stare at the little wizards in the library. When she saw Hermione, her eyes became softer. Then she would become very alert when she saw some little wizards who looked restless, fearing that they would dirty or damage her books. However, her eyes would often stay on Lind and Jane. She didn't really intend to drive the two little wizards out. They might just suddenly discuss a certain issue and then suddenly quarrel. This kind of scene was not the first time she encountered it. Just remind them. She was also worried about Lind. She had noticed this little wizard for a long time. He had come to her in the morning to ask about relevant books and he had not left here until now. She liked the little wizard who loved reading, but it was not advisable to read for such a long time. She just walked over and looked at Lind's bloodshot eyes and pale face. She suddenly had the idea of driving this little guy out. Since this little wizard said she wanted to go out, let her go out. Then she looked at Hermione again, thinking about how to persuade this little witch gently. Lynn took the book, and then came here to handle the borrowing procedures, and then they walked out. Before leaving, Madame Pants gently reminded him that although the stories in the book were beautiful, he should also take care of his health, as too much is as bad as too little. Lynn nodded quickly, and he could see the worry under Madame Pants's stern face. On the contrary, Jane thought she was kicked out because she was too noisy until she walked out of the library. But she didn't feel sorry for Lind, she just felt that she was too embarrassed to be kicked out in such a public place. But after they walked out of a short corridor, her mentality had been adjusted and she continued the previous topic. If I remember correctly, some conjectures about Atlantis were not proven until the end of the last century. And you can see that this book is a product of the 18th century, and even some of the words in it are only used in this century. Jane said, and something was wrong. Lynn seemed to have heard a question. No, this looks like an old book from the 18th century. How can there be so many relatively trendy remarks? Jane snatched the book from Lynn's hand. You mean, this looks like an old book, but it's actually a new book? Linda asked tentatively. Yes, many books at that time were written with ratskin and twigs of the western iron tree for easy preservation. Books made in this way can be preserved for hundreds or thousands of years. But at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a new magic book printing technology that was easier to preserve and copy. So this technology has been used for a long time. Jane turned the page again and looked at the content on it. Rat and Western Iron Tree? Linda asked in confusion. Yes, this is a very old technology. The skin of the rat is very thick, and with the infiltration of the Western Iron Tree branches, the content written will never fall off like a tattoo. Jane explained. But this technology has been innovated in this century, and because this technology seriously endangers the production of rats and Western iron trees, it has been used for a long time. Jane continued to explain. These touched Linda's knowledge blind spot, so he simply didn't bother Jane, but let her continue thinking. The two stood at the corner of the corridor, maintaining a state of silence. Jane picked up a page with 2 fingers and rubbed it gently with her fingertips. This is not the kind of rat skin I have seen, it is the skin of other animals. Jane whispered. As she rubbed it, a small crack gradually appeared in the middle of the page. Give me some light. Jane squinted her eyes as much as she could, but most of the light in Hogwarts came from the ubiquitous candles, so she still couldn't see clearly in many places, so she could only call out to Linda. Lumos. Linda pulled out his wand and quietly released a fluorescent spell. With the arrival of the light, he also saw the small crack. Jane saw the small crack and increased the intensity of rubbing her hands, and the crack gradually became larger. 1 page gradually turned into 2. In the hidden page, there was content scribbled in an unknown blue ink. It can be seen that there are a lot of corrections on it, and there are also long strings of undivided sentences. There's actually a mezzanine here. There's actually a mezzanine here. The two said this in unison. Keep going. Lind urged hurriedly, he was eager to see if the other pages of the book could also be split into 2. Jane picked up other pages and repeated the trick, and then she sat directly on the stairs. Lind maintained the fluorescent spell, and white light spread from the tip of his wand. The two sat on the stairs of the castle, and people who passed by just walked away quickly. After a while, the two divided the whole book into 2 parts. Unlike what Lind thought at the beginning, only some pages of this whole book could be separated into 2 parts. The separated interlayer content was full of things written in blue ink, and it looked like a manuscript. In this way, there was an extra manuscript of about 3 or 4 pages in the original Mysterious Atlantis. Jane was also very curious about the content. She turned over the first page of the manuscript, pushed the book towards Lind, and then read it in the corridor. My name is Bashir Elton. I inherited the work of my father and grandfather and worked as a lightkeeper at the North Cape Lighthouse. I must write down this story that I personally experienced. Since I came back, I have gradually forgotten that incident. My head is in a daze. Every night, I listen to the sound of the waves rolling and hitting outside. These sounds gradually turn into unknown mumblings and reach my ears. It says, forget it, forget it. Bashir, the author of this book. Jane whispered softly. Although the letters on the manuscript are extremely difficult to recognize, and the author's cultural literacy is not high, it is particularly difficult for them to read. And his mental state when he wrote this manuscript should also be problematic. Linda added another item in his mind. My grandfather told me, in the past, a large fleet with white sails would sail from the distant coastline, and the ship still retained the warmth of the sunshine on the eastern coast and the sweet fragrance from the exotic gardens and magnificent temples. One day, when the full moon was shining in the sky, I boarded a strange ship with white sails flying high. A man on the ship invited me to sail with him to the beautiful unknown coast. Chapter 37. I didn't agree to his request, and the next day, he disappeared. Later, I saw him under countless full moons, but he didn't invite me again. He just stood on the deck, as if he was guarding the full moon. On a bright moonlit night, I accepted the invitation I had made long ago, and walked onto the white ship along the moonlight bridge built on the sea. The man who invited me greeted me, and his words were pleasant and familiar. He had a thick beard and wore a white robe like canvas. He said his name was Theseus. Afterwards, we rode to the mysterious south under the white light of the beautiful full moon and the song of the waves and tides. This was undoubtedly a dreamlike journey. During the voyage, we passed a city surrounded by thick black fog. Theseus told me that it was voodoo. It is a paradise for the dead and a tomb for the living. There the dead live a happy life. We also went to, crossed out, and I can no longer remember what the place was called. But it was undoubtedly a strange garden. We went there in the morning sun, under a sky as bright as rose gold. It was bright and beautiful, and I had never known it. A magnificent terrace was built from the sea, with trees and strange temples everywhere, with white roofs and pillars shining. Theseus said that this land retains all the beautiful dreams and thoughts that humans have created and forgotten. When I looked back at the terrace, I immediately knew that he was right. Many of the scenes that spread out before my eyes were what I had seen beyond the misty horizon or in the depths of the phosphorescent ocean. In addition, there was something more beautiful than what I knew. The more magnificent forms and fantasies of all things, these are the imaginations of young poets who died before the world understood what they saw and dreamed. We set foot there and stayed there for countless days and nights. After that, we boarded the white ship again and continued our journey. I once asked him where we were going. But he sang loudly. Let's go, to the unknown distance. Follow the waves. Follow the sun. He sang poems that I didn't understand at all, and its tune was so similar to the ballads beaten by the waves and tides on the day we set sail. I don't know how long it took, we came to the Aegean Sea. We came to Athens, where everyone seemed to know Theseus. I talked to them about my views on art, I said talking about philosophy that I didn't know what it was. We met a big white bird. Theseus told me that it was the bird of the sky, and according to legend it would take people to the city of 1,000 secrets, Atlantis. Under my strong pleading, we ended our journey in Athens and began to chase the bird of the sky. During this period, Theseus always hoped that I would return, because Atlantis was a place that no one had ever been to. On the 31st day of our journey following the bird of the sky, we saw the basalt columns in the west. They were wrapped in thick fog, and we couldn't see the scenery behind the columns or their tops. Some people even said that they reached the sky. Theseus began to plead with me to turn back again, but I completely ignored him, just imagining that the joy of the singers and organists coming from the other side of the basalt columns was far better than the sweetest melody in Athens. It sounded like praising me for being able to sail a long way under the full moon and come here. The white ship sailed in the direction of the melody and past the basalt columns. When the music stopped and the fog dissipated, I saw it. It was more magnificent than any city I had ever known or dreamed of. The spires of the temples pierced the sky and stretched to the horizon, and the cold grey walls stretched to the end of the horizon. Only a few spots of light could be seen from outside the walls, which turned into gorgeous friezes and charming sculptures on the roof. But in my ecstasy, the calm sea suddenly turned into a raging sea. Our sailboat was helpless in the irresistible torrent and was swept to an unknown destination. Soon, our ears were filled with the roar of falling waters, and on the horizon far ahead, a terrifying waterfall raised foam, where all the water in the world fell into the abyss of nothingness. Then tears ran down Theseus's cheeks. He covered his eyes tightly with his hands, as if he wanted to dig them out of the turbulence, and said, "We have abandoned beautiful Athens and will never see it again. The gods are far greater than humans, and victory will always belong to them." I closed my eyes before the violent collision came, because I didn't want to see the birds in the sky flapping their blue wings mockingly above the rapids. After the collision, there was darkness, and I heard the wailing of humans and non-humans. A big storm blew from the east, and I crouched on the wet rocks rising from my feet, shivering with cold. I heard the collision again, and when I opened my eyes, I found myself on the lighthouse's lookout, which had spent almost eternity since I set sail. In the darkness below, I vaguely saw a dark shadow crashing on the ruthless reef. When I turned my eyes away from the wreckage, I suddenly realized that the light of the lighthouse had gone out for the first time since my grandfather began to keep the light. When the night got darker, I boarded the lighthouse and found that the calendar on the wall was still stuck on the day when I boarded the white ship. After dawn, I went down from the tower to look for wreckage on the rocks, but I only found the body of a bird I had never seen before, the color of which was like the clear sky, and a fragment of a mast that was whiter than the waves and the snow on the top of the mountain. After that, the sea never told me its secrets again. Countless nights have passed in which the full moon gleamed in wine and glory high in the sky, but the shadow of the white ship's sails has never appeared in the south again. Snap! The snapping sound of the book closing suddenly awakened Linda, who had been restless for a long time, from the dreamlike story. There was silence all around, and they didn't know how long it had been since they sat on the stage. Tisk, it's boring. I thought I could write something that could stand up to the test, but it took me a long time to write a novel. Jane sighed with disdain, stood up from the stairs, and patted her butt. Gray, with a disappointed look on his face. Her view is completely different from Linda's. Anderson stood on the windowsill, the moonlight shining on his body dyeing his feathers a strange purple. Linda couldn't help but shuddered. He felt his chin was itchy. The new turtleneck sweater he bought was scratching his head, he thought. This was the first time he had worn it. He stretched out his hand to scratch, but felt 3 soft cracks. What's going on? I don't know when my gills came out. Why didn't I feel it at all? Cold sweat dripped from his forehead. Jane stood up and looked at Linda, who was still sitting with a puzzled look on her face, a little strange. What are you doing? You're not going to be frightened by such a little story, are you? She said teasingly. Lind put the turtleneck back together, stood up with his shoulders hunched, trying to cover his entire head. He put the hood of his robe back on and put his hands in his pockets. It's just that my legs were a little stiff from the cold after sitting for too long. Linda stood up. Haha, who told you not to wear more clothes? Jane smiled happily, then walked ahead holding the book. Linda followed quietly, fully wrapped up. Chapter 38. Linda huddled himself in his robes and walked quietly behind Jane. Whenever Jane stood a little closer to him, she could hear Linda's thumping heartbeat. Jane! Hermione's voice suddenly came from behind them. Then Linda heard hurried footsteps from behind. He turned his head and saw Hermione jogging over, which frightened him so much that he quickly dodged to the side. Where have you been? I've been looking for you. Hermione didn't expect Linda to take the initiative to let her go. According to this person's temper, isn't it always others who let him go? She turned her head and glanced at Linda in confusion. Then she ran straight to Jane. Where have you been? Hermione took Jane's hand freely. I've been looking for you for a long time. Madame Pants persuaded me to come out of the library a few minutes after you left. As soon as I came out, you disappeared. I thought you went back to the lounge directly, but I didn't see you in the lounge. Hermione said naggingly. Jane was about to reply, but Linda also spoke up. Jane. I suddenly remembered that I have something to do. Linda's voice was very heavy, as if he was enduring some pain. You go back first. Oh, by the way, give me the book. Linda was about to stretch out his hand in his pocket, and suddenly thought of something, and gestured with his fingers in his pocket. Sure enough, the paw pad also came out. Give it to it. Linda gestured to Anderson. Anderson rolled his purple eyes on the side. Although it didn't know what happened, it was what its boss said. It flapped its wings and flew in front of Jane, motioning Jane to give it the book. Linda looked at Anderson and suddenly thought of the sky bird in the story. To be honest, the plot of this story is really not good, but every time Linda thought of it, he would have an unexplained palpitation and fear. Jane looked at Linda in confusion, making sure he was not joking. I really have something to do. Linda looked at her puzzled expression and could only emphasize it again. Curfew is coming soon, what else can you do? Hermione looked at Linda. Linda looked at Hermione, thinking, what does this have to do with you? Are you going to say you will lose points for Gryffindor if you do this? Okay. He admitted that this was what Hermione would say in the first grade. After all, Harry and Ron's several night outings after getting the invisible cloak were strongly opposed by Hermione. But what does this have to do with me? I'm very annoyed now. Lind felt the sweater rubbing against his gills, and he couldn't just show it off. But he was not the kind of person who would lose his temper at others. I just have some. Lind was interrupted by Hermione before he finished speaking. If you have anything, we can help. Hermione looked at him seriously. Lind was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect Hermione to say such a thing. His words were also blocked at the corner of his mouth. Hermione's words made him lose his temper. He could only shake his head and refuse her. Then he looked at the book in Jane's chest. Jane handed the book over, and Anderson's claws grabbed the spine of the book and flew back to Linda. He pulled his hand out and hid the book back in his sleeves. I'm leaving first. After saying that, he hurried to the other side. He wore a hood and hid himself in the darkness along the way. He's so weird. What did you do before? Seeing Linda walking away, Hermione asked curiously. I don't know why he is like this. We just read the same book together. Jane recalled what happened just now. She remembered that Linda was a little weird since she closed the book. Read a book together? The one just now? How can you read such a small book together? Read it face to face. Hermione seemed to have thought of something, and her tone became teasing. She deliberately tilted her eyes and looked at Jane. What? No. Jane blushed, but when she thought about the fact that there seemed to be only a wand between the two of them just now, it was Linda who released the fluorescent spell. My face seemed to be leaning against his hand all the time, and it seemed that I almost put my head on it later. Thinking of this, she suddenly blushed. But I can't blame her. That novel is full of typos, scars, and large-scale corrections. It's tiring to read it. She couldn't understand how Lind could read it with relish. As soon as he turned the corner, Lind hurriedly found an empty classroom and walked in, then leaned against the door to hold it. Only then could he feel a little relaxed. Before, he only felt that people passing by looked at him strangely outside. Lind took off his hood, threw the book on the table casually, and pulled down the collar of his sweater to feel a little more comfortable. Fortunately, I have a lot of long hair. He murmured in a low voice, touching his ears with his right hand. His ears were completely different from normal ones. There were sharp bone spurs growing on the outer ear helix, and a thin membrane was connected in the middle of the bone spurs. Lind locked the classroom door and searched on the podium. Luckily, he found a mirror. Fluorescent flash. The tip of the stick lit up white light, and he picked up the mirror with his other hand to look at his ears. He saw that his ears were no longer human ears, but had turned into fish fins. Alas! Fortunately, it's long hair, otherwise Jane would have noticed it just now. When he found his gills coming out, he felt something strange in his ears, which was why he put on the hood. Linda sighed helplessly, then put the mirror down and looked at the book he had just thrown on the table. Is it just reading a story and then uncontrollably transformed? Or is there another reason? Linda wondered why the book had such an effect on him. Stop the spell. Linda waved his wand at the book to release the spell, but nothing strange appeared. Is there no magic attached to it, or is it because my spell is not powerful enough? Linda looked solemnly at the little blue book lying quietly on the table. And why is it that only I have this unconscious change, but Jane doesn't? The reason why he took the book from Jane was that he was afraid that the book would be borrowed and some tragedies that no one wanted to see would happen. Is it targeting any non-human? Or maybe it's just targeting fishmen? On the other hand, I just grew gills and other things uncontrollably, which is not a bad thing. Or is it because it is only useful for fishmen? Lind was thinking about various possibilities in his mind. Finally, as he focused his attention in his mind, his gills, webbed feet, and fin ears gradually returned to the form of a normal person. During the period when his body was gradually recovering, he thought of many blind spots. Maybe his changes have nothing to do with this book. It may be a manifestation of adolescence of hybrid fishmen, just like he grew ear fins again this time. Or maybe his transformation is related to emotions. He was shocked after reading that article, so he unconsciously became a half-fishman. Or maybe he became more sensitive, which may be related to the humidity of the air. He sorted out all the possibilities of his transformation into a half-merman. Seeing that he returned to his normal human state, he carefully picked up the book again and pushed open the door of the classroom. I have to go to the room of requirement tonight to test my body. Along the way, he always felt that there was something he hadn't noticed, but he couldn't remember it no matter how hard he tried. I guess I'm just overthinking it. Lind could only comfort himself in the end. After all, as a half-fishman, it's normal for me to have many strange things on my body. He was inexplicably certain that he was a mixed-blood orphan of human and fishman. Chapter 39. When Lind arrived at the Gryffindor common room, it was curfew time. Filch stared at him outside the fat lady's portrait as he walked into the tunnel, as if he was regretting why Lind didn't arrive a few minutes later. That way he could catch him. Compared to the darkness and coldness outside the common room was hot inside. The little wizards of Gryffindor were more energetic than those of other colleges. The dancing flames in the fireplace dispelled the cold of November, but such an environment seemed a bit too hot and noisy to him. As soon as he entered, he heard Hermione yelling, "How can you learn anything like this? It's impossible. Forget it. You have to do your homework yourself." She sat at the table, and opposite her were two embarrassed little wizards. They had parchment in front of them but didn't know where to start. They were Ron and Harry. Tomorrow is another new week, and both of them still have a lot of homework to do. The most difficult one is the Transfiguration homework. Professor McGonagall asked them to turn a matchbox into a cup last week, which simply stumped all the little wizards. And after class, they were required to write at least 3 parchment articles to explain their feelings and difficulties when they were transformed, which made Harry, Ron, and most of the others miserable. Ron, who was embarrassed by Hermione's scolding, glanced at Lind who came in, and he didn't know what was going on in his mind. Maybe he wanted to copy Lind's homework. To be honest, if they hadn't had a common secret on Halloween last time, he wouldn't dare to have such an idea. After all, Lind really made people feel difficult to get along with. But it was different after that time. After all, they had some friendship, didn't they? Just when Lind passed by them, Ron hurriedly came up to Lind and asked for his Transfiguration article. "Of course," Lind said. Hearing this, Ron was so happy that he almost laughed, and looked at Hermione provocatively. "Lind, how could you do this?" Hermione was a little angry. "Why not? He wanted to copy, didn't he? Whether he copied my paper or not has nothing to do with whether I learned anything or not. Since he chose to copy homework, he must be prepared to learn nothing. But what does it matter? Anyway, he can graduate by coming to Hogwarts and studying for 7 years every year. Right, you two. Since you chose to copy homework, you must be prepared to learn nothing. After all, how can you not pay a price for such an easy thing as copying homework?" Linda smiled and looked at Ron and Harry. We just forgot to do the homework, and now it's too late, and we are worried that we can't hand it in on time tomorrow." I understand. Linda looked at them calmly with a blank expression. "Okay, I give up." "You are right." Ron raised his hands in surrender. "At worst, I won't sleep tonight. I don't believe such an assignment can stump us, right, Harry?" He turned his head to look at Harry, hoping that he could fight with him. Harry was also stimulated by what Lind said. He slapped the table and stood up and said, "Yes, we are not stupid." However, when they looked back, they found that Lind had walked up the spiral staircase leading to the dormitory without knowing when. At this time, Jane came over with a glass of lemonade, looked at the two people who were excited, and asked in confusion, what happened to them. Then Hermione repeated what Lind said as much as possible. After listening to the cause and effect, Jane chuckled a few times, and then took out 2 black things from her bag and handed them to the 2 people who were excited. "Strong coffee candy, you will definitely use it tonight, I have no doubt about it. Do you still carry this kind of candy with you?" Hermione asked curiously. "I only carry it occasionally. In fact, it tastes good when you get used to it." Jane laughed, and then she also started reading. Although the title of King of the Century is very childish, it is actually a book that records the lives of several of the most powerful wizards in each century and gives these wizards the title of King of the Century. This is the 1899 version, and the latest version was not published until 1999. The new version will update the most famous and powerful wizards of this century. However, contemporary wizards have a basic understanding of the King of the Century of this century. Gellert Grindelwald and Albus Dumbledore must be on the list. Now the British wizarding community generally believes that Voldemort can also get the title of King of the Century, but wizards from other countries do not agree. When Jane was reading the content about Salazar Slytherin, Hermione suddenly asked her, "Do you still have nightmares recently?" "Of course not, who has nightmares every night?" Jane smiled helplessly and indicated to Hermione that she was normal recently. That's good. It sounded like Hermione breathed a sigh of relief. Harry, who was full of enthusiasm, suddenly let out a wail. He looked at the parchment in front of him. He just felt like a literary giant. He summarized everything in his entire class in just a short paragraph. Then he looked at Ron. Wow, this is a great writer. He summarized everything in just 2 short sentences. Then he and Ron looked at Hermione pitifully. Don't even think about it. You misunderstood. I am still passionate about my homework, but I need some help. Harry said quickly. Help from the best, most beautiful, and kindest little witch in the 1st grade. Ron answered quickly. I won't help you, don't even think about it. Jane said, and she naturally accepted adjectives such as the best, the most beautiful, and the kindest. Then a few people continued to fool around for a while before starting to do their homework under Hermione's guidance. By the time they went back to bed, they were already the last people to leave. Not long after they left, there were unheard footsteps on the spiral staircase. Linda put on his black robe and walked out of the lounge again. Arriving at the room of requirement with ease, Linda walked directly into the swimming pool room. This time he wanted to test the threshold of changes in his body. He took off his robe and set it aside, then he began the test. One arm was immersed in the water. The palm of the hand that entered the water became webbed and it was difficult to control it independently. There was no change in the immersed arm. There was no change in the parts that were not in the water. Only the head is immersed in the water, and the fins, ears, and gills appear. It is difficult to control independently. There are no changes in the other parts, and there are no changes in the parts that have not entered the water. One foot was immersed in the water, and webbing appeared on the sole of the foot, but the rest of the body remained unchanged. The lower body is immersed in the water, and the whole body changes. The water automatically flows up the skin and covers the whole body. Then he climbed to the edge of the pool, hooked his hands on the small steps on the edge, and in turn soaked his entire upper body in the water. The upper body is immersed in the water, and the whole body changes. The water flows along the skin. After this experiment, he also learned a little more about his body. If a small part of the body is in the water, then only the body soaked in the water will change. It takes 15s. 30s. If half the body or more is immersed in water, the water will slowly and automatically cover the whole body, and then the whole body will change. The water-immersed parts also complete the change in 15s. 30s. The rest of the parts will start to change after being wrapped by the water flow. Probably within a minute and a half. Then he began to test how long it would take for him to change from the fishman state to the human state. This is quite simple. Linda tested it with different body moisture levels. If you come out of the water directly, it will take 3 to 5 minutes to return to human form. If you wipe off the water droplets on your body with a towel, it only takes 1 to 3 minutes to become a human again. After that, he used a quick drying spell to dry himself directly, and it took less than half a minute to transform back into a human being. In other words, whether he can become a fishman or a human depends largely on the contact area between his body and the water body. However, it may also be because this is an experiment and he is not able to control his emotions very accurately. Or maybe it's because I'm still too young and so on. But this doesn't explain why he suddenly turned into a fishman in the corridor today, so he still needs more diverse experiments. Air humidity, simulated rain, and most importantly emotional desire control, etc. Chapter 40. Although he has not learned the weather spell now, it is not difficult to cast a spell to make it rain. Lin still remembers that he released a rain when he first got this wand. Waving the wand, recalling the feeling at that time, after many attempts, Lin finally succeeded in releasing a rain cloud. I saw a thick black and grey smoke appeared above the swimming pool, which condensed into a ball and dripped water. As the speed of the water dripping down became faster and faster, it soon turned into a drizzle. That's it, go in and see the effect. Lind closed his eyes and walked under the rain cloud. Dense raindrops continued to hit him, and soon he was wet. No change. He spread his palm and watched the raindrops hit his palm. Raise the wand and release the rain spell again. If repeated casting can't increase the density of the rain, then other methods can only be used. He made many preparations before doing the experiment. Fortunately, the black mist pouring out of his staff tip and the rain cloud above gathered together, and then the raindrops dripping on him became larger and more. He stopped releasing the black mist and continued to feel if there were any changes in his body. Still no. Continue. Finally, when he could only hear the sound of rain, his body began to slowly change into a fishman state. It is probably equivalent to the change of a heavy rain under normal circumstances. Since only heavy rain can transform, there is no need to test in a high humidity environment. Linda crossed out the scheduled test in his mind. Then the next test is personal state. It's a pity, if there is a boggart. That thing is very good at scaring people, and fear is one of the easiest extreme emotions to achieve. After using the spell to dissipate the rain cloud that had been raining on the ceiling, Linda stood on the shore where a lot of rain had accumulated and began to try to control himself to change back to human form. Although he couldn't control it yet, it was his own body after all. He felt that as long as he practiced often, he would be able to control himself to become a fishman or a human one day. So every time he changed, in addition to experimenting physically, he would also try to control the change in his heart. After a while, he became an ordinary 11-year-old wizard again, without gills, webbed feet and other strange things. Then he began to try to mobilize his emotions. He recalled the moment before his death in his previous life, when he was lying on the hospital bed, his face was haggard and his body was like a stick of wood. His throat was pierced and connected to the ventilator, and there were a bunch of machines next to him, with various needles in his hands connected to various liquid medicines on it. My mother was still peeling apples by her bed, mumbling something in her mouth, and it was difficult to hear the sound at that time. My father was sitting outside the door, restless, thinking that his illness must have dragged down the whole family. Then he closed his eyes tiredly, and could only hear the sound of something falling to the ground and a scream. It should be that apple that fell to the ground. Then, a feeling of weightlessness enveloped the whole body, and he vaguely remembered seeing something. Then he only had the memory after his rebirth. Time has eliminated the damage caused by Lin's experience to a certain extent. But this is the experience that can cause his emotional fluctuations the most. After all, this is a real death experience. He raised his hand and looked at it, no change. Emotions within the range of self-control cannot affect physical changes. Whether changes can be made under extreme emotions remains to be verified. Then I can think of two more possibilities. First, there is a spell in the book that I don't know about. Second, I just developed naturally and then turned into a fishman state uncontrollably. Then he looked at the neatly folded clothes he had placed aside. There was a book on top of these clothes. The blue cover, the title of the book is handwritten in large Gothic font, Mysterious Atlantis. Lind walked over and hesitated for many times before picking up the book. Then he turned to the biography of White Ship. Although Jane thought it was a low-quality story written by an uneducated person, he still felt that it was a biography that recorded a true story. My name is Bashir Elton. I inherited the work of my father and grandfather and worked as a lighthouse keeper at the North Cape Lighthouse. At first, he read it with the mentality of reading review materials, but before he knew it, he was immersed in this story again. And he felt that the story became more exciting, which was different from the feeling when he read it for the first time. When he read it for the first time, those typos and those incomprehensible sentences and words in it were obstacles when reading, which made people feel very uncomfortable. And this time, these obstacles in reading before seemed to become helpers, and those scars and lines of correction seemed to be reorganized and replaced in front of him. It was as if they came alive, and then turned into little people standing on the book to interpret everything that happened in the story for him, which made Lind unable to extricate himself and ignored everything outside. I don't know how long it took. When he finished reading the story again, Lind closed the book. Wow! It's absolutely amazing. His face flushed, as if he was injected with chicken blood. Does this white ship really exist? Why does the owner of the ship want Theseus? Is it a metaphor for the ship of Theseus? No, this author is obviously not the kind of person who understands metaphors. The two of them were sailing on a sailboat on the sea. This ship is definitely not simple. Moreover, the full moon appears many times in the text, and Theseus and his white ship only appear during the full moon. Lind put on his clothes and looked at the book with a smile on his face, as if he was looking at some treasure. Let's think about it when we go back. He straightened his collar, walked to the door of the room of requirement with the book in his arms with a drunken look on his face, put his hand on the door handle and walked out. Meow. A cat meow suddenly sounded in the silent castle. Also awakened Linda. No. He suddenly came back to his senses. What am I doing? Quickly run to the opposite side of the tapestry where the troll beats Barnabas silly. I was thinking hurriedly. I want a spacious house where I can swim. An inconspicuous door handle appeared on the smooth wall. He hurriedly opened the door. Before anyone could get in, the book was thrown in by him. The book hit the water and woke up Anderson, who was sleeping on the roof beam. He looked at Linda, who was roaring alone there in confusion. "Damn it, when did you fall for this thing?" Linda stared at the book soaked in the water. Recalling the sight of those lines dancing in front of his eyes when he was reading the story just now, and how intoxicated he looked after reading the story, he naturally put on his clothes and walked out of the room of requirement alone. At that time, he said, "Let's go back and think about it." What he was thinking about was not going back to the Gryffindor common room, but going back to the sea. The flames are blazing. A burst of flame suddenly exploded on the paper. However, after a while, those flames began to extinguish, while the book was completely unaffected. "I don't even understand how Harry and the others dare to enter the restricted book area and read randomly. This book is outrageous enough." He casually pulled out of his pocket the wooden stick he used as a practice wand. The tip of the stick flashed with light, and the wooden stick gradually turned into a bright silver dagger. Chapter 41. The dagger plunged hard, making a crunching sound. The tip of the knife pierced the cover of the book but did not cause any damage to it. Instead, it deformed the body of the book. This is definitely not an ordinary animal leather. After poking several times with no effect, Linda calmed down. The magic power was lost, and the dagger turned back into a stick again. Lin took off his robe, wrapped it around the book and picked it up. He will never touch this book directly again this time or even in the future. This is an evil thing. He actually wanted to lead me into the deep sea. Lind cast a drying spell on the wet robes and placed them in a relatively clean place. Then he walked to the edge of the pool and looked at the film between his fingers. I don't know how long ago, he unconsciously turned into a fishman state. Well. He frowned and looked at the book wrapped in the robe that was put aside with a complicated expression. Guide me into the deep sea. This book should contain a curse spell for fishmen, maybe a curse. The method of the curse is most likely to be reading the hidden article The White Ship. The effect of the curse is to guide me to become a fishman and cause me to have cognitive confusion and do some incredible things. Lin thought about what had just happened and mentally summarized the information about this book. At the same time, he did not forget to remind himself, the above conclusions are all based on my own personal experience and have only reference value. They cannot be dealt with based on the information I know. This is why he used words such as should and probably many times in his summary of this item. He does not have an all-knowing eye and will not draw firm conclusions about anything, but maintains a questioning mind. What's more, he has only come across this book twice. You should be more vigilant about it. If you don't handle this book properly, it will be troublesome if it causes any big trouble in the future. If I read this book in a crowded place today, it would be very troublesome. When the time comes that I transform into a fishman in public, in less than a day, maybe in 1 or 2 classes, the whole school will know that I am not a pure human. Most people in this school have blood theory in their hearts. If his identity is exposed, then he will never be able to be clean in the future. It is highly unlikely that he will drop out of school, but it will definitely be uncomfortable to be looked at like a cherished animal like Harry Potter every day. If I were in a fantasy world, I would definitely try to drip blood on it. After all, the fantasy setting is to shed blood to identify the master. But it's a pity that this is a wizarding world. He complained in his heart, you never know whether there will be wizards do something to you with your blood. Lind jumped into the water. Even in the November weather, the cold water only made him feel inexplicably warm. Gradually sinking to the bottom of the water, silently feeling the water flowing through his gills, he thought about how he could let the professors discover the abnormality in this book. The Hogwarts Library is the wizarding library with the largest collection of books in the UK. It is completely understandable that such dangerous fish would slip through the net and not be screened out by the professors and enter the restricted book area. He believed that as a normal person at this time, he would not think of independently researching the secrets in this dangerous book. He and Harry had the same attitude on this matter, find a teacher. But don't go looking for it yourself, that would be very troublesome. The best way is to let professors know about the unusual condition of the book through someone else. Of course, if there is no other way, he will choose to hide the book. After all, it's easier this way. It's a pity that if this happens, I won't be able to enter the library in the future. Linda had already made plans to let others bring books out for him in the future. Keeping immersed in the water, Linda gradually fell asleep while thinking. It wasn't until morning that he woke up and jumped out of the water. Throw the robe and wrapped book into an inconspicuous corner of the room. He woke Anderson and returned to the Gryffindor common room. That night, he still couldn't think of any good way for professors to discover the secrets of this book relatively naturally. The problem with this book comes from the fact that he only revealed its problem to himself. Jane didn't notice anything unusual when she read the book. So if you want to hand it in, you can only hand it in yourself. But that would be troublesome. Linda scratched his head, feeling a little irritated. What bothered him most was that he was focusing his brain cells on these things. He didn't understand how the protagonists in the previous TV series were thinking about how to scheming every day. To play tricks? Since you can't think of it, just don't think about it. At worst, I'd just throw it away in the hidden item room of the Room of Requirement and burn it down in a few years. As for the secret of Atlantis, to hell with it. After returning to the dormitory, Lynn tidied up, took out a new robe and put it on, then took standard spells, level 2 to the lounge and started a new round of study. If you only follow what's in the book and don't have your own understanding, you won't be able to learn this course well in the future. Snape's deep voice sounded in the underground potions classroom. When you mix advanced potions, you can never achieve exactly the same situation as in the book. The preliminary preparation of the drug, the environmental impact of the potion, and other factors, you have to make your own adjustments. Can't you understand such a small matter yourself? Snape's voice roared out. He held a spoon with Linda's potion in it. He looked very dissatisfied, and Linda stood opposite him with his head down and said nothing. Gryffindor deducted 5 points. You can do better, but you didn't put your heart into it. After saying that, he glanced at Harry and Neville and Seamus at the table behind him, and said, "This is more hateful than not doing it well at all." Harry was stunned. He was just standing aside and was criticized. Then he took another look at the potion he had mixed. The thick liquid slowly bubbled in the crucible, and the bubbles burst with a pungent smell. Well, it was indeed not as good as Linda's. "Professor, it was actually me." Jane stood beside him and wanted to say something, but was interrupted by Snape as soon as she opened her mouth. "I think I have said more than once that you have to raise your hand before you want to speak." Gryffindor deducted 2 points. Snape turned around and said lightly, "And it is indeed your fault. Why didn't you raise Augustus' question? Is it because he said it is what it is? Don't you have your own thoughts?" Jane looked calm. In fact, the reason why the potion was not good this time was entirely because of her. At that time, Linda was squeezing the juice of sage seeds, and then instructed her to put 2 sage leaves, and if there were no large leaves, put 4 small leaves. As a result, she had a brain twitch and put 4 large ones. If someone else came to make the potion, it would probably be ruined. Now this pot of potion can be made because of Linda's later remedy. Potions class has always been a group of 2, but Snape only targeted Linda, and it was because of her fault, which made her a little embarrassed. She wanted to say something but was interrupted by him for no reason. Snap! Snap! She stabbed the chopping board with a knife, as if it was Snape. Chapter 42. The Quidditch match was about to start this Saturday. Harry was getting more and more nervous, which made the training effect of the past 2 days not as good as before. Wood was so anxious that he had been giving Harry psychological counseling. Lind had not taken care of the book since he threw it in the corner of the swimming pool. His recent focus was on Harry. Because Fluffy, the 3-headed dog, was transferred and the trapdoor didn't know where it went, so he was still a little curious about how the story would go next. On Saturday, Harry felt that today was his day of judgment. Lind declined all those who invited him to watch the Quidditch match, although only 2 or 3 people asked him if he wanted to go. Lind stayed in the room of requirement until the evening. When he returned to the lounge, as expected, they were discussing the problem of Harry's flying broom this morning. Just like the original book, when Harry was about to catch the golden snitch, his broom suddenly lost control. They found Snape chanting a spell on the stands. Finally, Hermione went to burn Snape's robes and his broom to restore it to normal. Harry quietly complained about Snape's behavior, and then thought of Snape's appearance in the house where the 3-headed dog was imprisoned on Halloween Eve. At the same time, he also thought of the trapdoor and the Philosopher's Stone as expected. Of course, these were not told to Lind by him, but by Jane, who heard them talking to Hermione, and then Lind began to ask Jane for information. Christmas is coming. One morning in mid-December, Hogwarts School woke up from a dream and found that the surroundings were covered with several feet of snow, and the lake was covered with hard ice. The Weasley twins were punished because they cast a spell on several snowballs, making them chase Quirrell around and finally hit the back of his turban. Seeing this, Lynn smacked his lips, and he wanted to do something. Several owls flew across the snowy sky to deliver mail. After going through a lot of hardships, they had to recover their strength under Hagrid's care before they could take off again. On Friday night, the 20th, Lind officially returned the photo of the water gun spell to Professor Flitwick and declared the challenge failed. He still remembered the disappointed expression on Professor Flitwick's face at the time, but there was nothing he could do. He had successfully learned the water gun spell a week before, but he still remembered the scene that day, standing in the room of requirement where he practiced spells. Opposite him stood a puppet. Riptide. The spell was about to be finished, and the waving of the wand was also coming to an end, but he didn't dare to continue. He could feel his magic boiling and rioting wildly in his body. The previous spells and the waving of the wand had completely detonated the magic in his body, all the magic. If this spell was cast, not to mention the power, his own body couldn't hold it. If his body is compared to a dam, then when he usually releases spells, it is the dam that is draining water normally. It can be controlled. But when he released the water gun curse, it was like an unbearable dam. As long as he opened a small hole, the violent water flow would suddenly destroy the entire dam, bringing an unmanageable disaster. He abruptly stopped releasing the spell and used all his desire to try to suppress the violent magic. This was also the biggest magic accident he had ever experienced. I know this spell, but not completely. This was the result of his 2 months of practice. After returning the photo, Lind began to prepare for the one-week Christmas vacation. As early as a week ago, Professor McGonagall began to register the list of people who stayed at school and went home, and Lind was the one who was going home. Harry still didn't plan to go back to Privet Drive. Ron's family was going to Romania to visit Charlie, so he had to stay at school. Jane and Hermione also wanted to go home. Everything seemed to be the same as the original plot, except that there was an extra Jane. Lind was not a person without a home, he had to go back to sea. Besides, after hanging out in the swimming pool for half a year, he really missed the sea in Knot Town. On the morning of the 23rd, Lind walked out of the castle for the first time and came to Hogsmeade Village to board the train to London. It was not until the evening that he arrived in London. After walking out of platform 9 3/4, and saying goodbye to Jane and Hermione, Lind dragged his small suitcase and walked out of London Station. As soon as he came out, he saw a guy with a beer belly and sunglasses walking towards him. "Ahaha, why are you so late, you little brat? I've been waiting for you for a long time." Felix's big hand like a palm fan directly covered half of Lind's face, and then grabbed Lind's head and hit it on his beer belly. "Done." Felix's belly bounced up like a ball. Lind hurriedly broke free. He was still wearing a black leather jacket and leather pants. His beard had been tied into a braid, just like a punk old man, but the fact is that he is only in his early 40s this year. Alas! Lind sighed. "What's wrong? Were you bullied at school?" Felix frowned when he saw Lind's appearance. "No, I'm just worried that you'll never find a wife." He shook his head again. "You stinky boy! This has nothing to do with you." Felix heard this and smiled without caring at all. He pulled the suitcase behind Lind and put it in his car. To be honest, although Felix's income is not high, he is a typical person who lives a carefree life, as many people said on the internet in his previous life. One person eats enough, the whole family is not hungry. Linda followed him into the car, and the two drove directly to Charing Cross. They first booked 2 rooms at the hotel opposite the Leaky Cauldron, and then went to Diagon Alley to buy a lot of fun things. Although Felix was nominally his guardian, he respected Linda in his heart, and Linda himself had lived 2 lives, so he was not as difficult to discipline as a child, so the relationship between the two was more like friends. This time, the two agreed to have a good time in London tomorrow, which was Christmas Eve, and then return to Knot Town at night. Felix was responsible for all expenses represented by pounds, while Linda was responsible for all expenses of wizard currency. He basically didn't use the large amount of gold galleons he exchanged in Gringotts last time. Except for occasionally ordering some cheap medicines, magic items, and books, the biggest consumption might be the galleon that bounced on Draco's forehead at that time. Linda also bought an owl for Felix so that he could contact him in the future. The next day, the two played around in various places in London and ate and drank a lot. It was not until the afternoon that the two set out back to Knot Town. Chapter 43. Linda got up early in the morning. The first thing he did after returning to Knot on Christmas Eve was to visit Mrs. Evelyn at the cemetery, where he stayed until very late. Although he slept late, Linda got up in the morning. He used his feet to pry open the gifts beside him. They were gifts from people he knew in the magic world, although he didn't know who would give him gifts. Due to his Chinese habits in his previous life, he was not the kind of person who would open gifts in a hurry. Although this house was very old, it still had basic heating, so Linda went downstairs directly in his relatively thin pajamas. Opening the door, cold air rushed in. Linda hurried out and then closed the door. He exhaled a breath of mist from his mouth. There was much less snow in the garden than in Hogwarts, and the sound of waves could be vaguely heard here. Boom boom boom. Felix's car drove over from a distance and stopped under this building. Felix came down in a deerskin coat and patted the pine tree tied to the roof of the car. Because they were playing in London yesterday, he asked someone to help him get a pine tree, and he would pick it up today. This pine tree is about the same height as Felix, and it is very suitable to be placed indoors. Linda hurried over, and Felix was not surprised that Linda got up so early. After the two chatted, Linda hurriedly urged him to move the tree. After all, he was cold outside all the time. Felix didn't say, "Can't you use your magic?" At first, Linda was worried that he would ask such a question, but later he learned that after he left, Felix studied the brochure of the Wizarding Statute of Secrecy that he got from the Leaky Cauldron several times. Linda said he was helping, but in fact he just helped Felix take out a bunch of things to decorate the Christmas tree in the back of the car. Felix was alone, so of course they spent Christmas in Linda's house. As soon as the two of them finished putting up the Christmas tree, someone knocked on the door. They knew who was coming. They heard the choir members visiting from a distance. Then more people began to visit them. Compared with other Augustus family members, Lind and Felix, who were not adopted, were undoubtedly direct descendants, and Lind still lived in Mrs. Evelyn's former residence. So at this time of year, basically many people would come here to visit them, and many of them had worked hard in other places and came back to Knot Town. This also made the two of them have to stay in the house and wait for waves of guests. But this was still good for Lind, at least most people would bring him Christmas gifts. At this time, Lind could only open the gifts in front of him according to the local customs. These things included game consoles, books, various interesting small ornaments, etc. Lind thanked these brothers and sisters one by one and put them aside. Until the evening, Felix and Lind ran to the best restaurant in town for dinner. It was not until he returned to the house at night that he looked at the gifts from the magic world. Lind himself only sent gifts to 3 professors this time, McGonagall, Flitwick, and Dumbledore. As for his classmates, there were only Cedric, Jane, and a senior wizard. He felt that it was unnecessary to send gifts to others. Similarly, Cedric and Jane also sent him gifts, and 2 senior wizards also sent him gifts. One of them was a witch who liked children very much, especially those who looked good like Lind. Lind didn't expect that the other party would send gifts, so he didn't send a gift at first, but just wrote a greeting card. The other one was the top card of the club, and now Professor Flitwick's favorite student in Hogwarts, a boy obsessed with magic research, who has published many papers in many professional journals, and the response was good. He admired Lind's talent and answered Lind's questions many times. Lind sent a gift to this person. No other wizards sent him gifts. Most of the people who had a moderate or good relationship with him sent him greeting cards, which was a token of their appreciation. For example, the Harry Potter trio, his roommate, and some other senior wizards in the Charms Club. Professor Flitwick and Dumbledore also sent gifts, and there was also an unsigned gift. He thought about it and didn't know who sent it. He first opened 2 gifts from the Charms Club, one of which contained various snacks, which was sent by the witch who liked children. Then there was the other one, in which there were several books tied together, and some of the papers had fallen off. Lind opened it and saw that it was all the Charms class notes from the 1st to 6th grade of the 7th grade Magic Madman. This was a great gift for him. This should not be underestimated for his future development. After carefully putting these notes away, he opened the gift from Jane. A small blue-ringed octopus pendant. I don't know what it is made of, but it should be some kind of mineral. There is nothing special about it. There is also a greeting card inside, which reads, "Do you dare to eat octopus?" Maybe she thinks octopus is a disgusting and scary creature, Linda thought. However, he didn't have the habit of hanging things on his body, so he put it aside, although this pendant was quite nice. Cedric sent him a very new copy of Practical Spells I. Lind now knew that the Practical Magic series of books had stopped printing and publishing a long time ago. It was rare for private individuals to have such a new book except for those in various libraries. So Cedric's gift was very thoughtful. Together with the Practical Spells 3 he got in the Room of Requirement, he now had 2 copies of this series. Professor Flitwick sent him a small package. The professor himself cast a traceless extension spell and a solidification spell on it. The function of the solidification spell is to stabilize a certain spell. It is a spell engraved on many magical items, including flying brooms, self-cleaning robes, etc. Here it is used to stabilize the traceless extension spell for a long time. He has not learned these 2 spells yet. Lind took a look and found that the space inside was about the size of 3 suitcases. It is really a good thing for home travel, murder and looting, and throwing corpses in the wilderness. Then he opened the gift given to him by Professor Dumbledore. From the appearance, it should be a book, so he was a little looking forward to it. But when he opened it, it was not a book, but a flat rectangular box like a book. It looked like a book from the outside. There was a note on it, saying, "There is a good thing inside. But you have to find a way to open it yourself." This old bee likes to do this kind of thing. Linda cursed inwardly. Then he put the thing aside. Now is the time to open the gifts. He has to open all the gifts before studying this box. Then he reached out and took the unsigned box. Chapter 44. Linda picked it up and shook it for a while, listening to the clanging sound inside. "Who sent this from?" Linda complained. Generally, when sending gifts, a note is left outside. This person would not put a note inside. Linda carefully unpacked the package. He thought that the things inside were probably very tricky joke props, and he didn't know who sent them. He leaned his head and upper body back, squinting his eyes, just like watching a horror movie. To be honest, he was ready for something to pop out and hit him in the face. He opened it carefully, but only saw a small medicine bottle in the box, which looked like the Fenjujing bottle in his previous life. The thick bottle was filled with transparent and thick potion. Obviously, the clanging sound just now came from here. He picked up the small medicine bottle and looked at the liquid inside through the desk lamp. Unfortunately, he didn't know much about potion science. This was a potion he didn't recognize. Then he looked inside the gift box. There was nothing inside except this bottle. There's no signature on the box. Who sent it? Since there was no information about this thing, Linda decided not to touch it for now. He would ask people around him who sent it to him after he got to school. After putting away the medicine bottle, he picked up the box that Dumbledore gave him and looked at it. The box was brown in color, with golden lace inlaid on the 8 corners. On the box, there was a round badge with a phoenix totem inlaid with silver wire. If he remembered correctly, this should be the symbol of the Dumbledore family. Why did Dumbledore give me something? I don't know him well. Linda was not curious about what was in the box, but thought about it carefully. He had no reason to doubt the authenticity of the gift. When he opened the gift, a fiery red feather fell out. It was Fox Feather. This was a token of Dumbledore to a certain extent, and it was absolutely unique. And when he confirmed that it was Fox's feather, the feather spontaneously combusted and burned to ashes in a short while, which scared him. I think there should be some kind of spell or something on it to ensure that the recipient will automatically destroy it after confirming its authenticity, so as to avoid being collected and reused by someone with ulterior motives. After weighing it, there was no sound coming from it, so it was impossible to preliminarily determine the size and material of the object inside. In terms of weight, it is heavier than a normal-sized book. In addition, the box must have a lot of weight, so we can only know that the object inside should not be too heavy. Then most metals are excluded, and as for the others, they cannot be weighed. The box has no lock, but the entire surface of the box flashes green light from time to time. It is obviously protected by some kind of spell, and no matter how hard he tries, he can't pry it open. Well, give up on this one. He did try the effect of the spell to stop, but unfortunately he is still outside the school and can't use magic rashly. This trace is very troublesome. Putting the box and the potion together, he picked up the book Practical Spells I again. After getting Practical Spells 3, he looked up the relevant information of this series of books. The Practical Spells series is the same as the current Hogwarts Spells textbook Standard Spells series, which are gradually progressive in difficulty. It is said that this Practical Spells series is the previous textbook. As soon as Lind opened the catalogue of this book, he saw many spells he learned in Standard Spells 1 and 2. In addition, there were many spells he had never heard of. This is a typical issue involving the publication period. In simple terms, the Ministry of Magic is becoming more and more strict about what is taught in magic academies. Some spells in practical spells are relatively dangerous, so when the author compiled the Standard Spells series, he specifically catered to the requirements of the Ministry of Magic. This also brought him huge rewards. As soon as the Standard Spells series came out, it was supported by the then Minister of Magic and many prestigious people. Later, it was selected as the new Hogwarts Spells course book, and its author also received a huge amount of gold galleons. That is to say, many spells in Practical Spells I are particularly suitable for young wizards of his age to master, but it is difficult to find resources. He originally planned to go to the Hogwarts library to read it, but that was time limited, and what was more troublesome was that the book Mysterious Atlantis he borrowed before was still thrown in the corner of the swimming pool in the room of requirement. He never dared to go to the library again since then, and even almost bumped into Madame Pants twice on the corridor stairs, which almost scared him to death. He thought that he could only ask Jane to borrow this book from the library again and again in the future. And now that he has the spell class notes from the 1st to 6th grades, he is sure that he will finish Standard Spells, Level 2 faster. Quick Turn, Grease the Foot, Smoke Spell. These spells are absolutely amazing. Lind looked at the catalogue with fiery eyes and praised repeatedly. Thanks Cedric, there is no better Christmas gift than these. He thought so in his heart. Linda reached into his sleeve and pulled out a branch. One end of the branch had already become round and reflective. This branch was the one he had been using to practice magic spells. He held the branch and continued to simulate until after 12 o'clock. Only then did Linda feel that he had really enjoyed his magic trick. Then, Lind sorted all these things out and put them all in the small bag that Professor Flitwick gave him. After working for a while, he lay down on the bed and fell asleep. In the morning, he took a look inside the house. Anderson was still not in the house. Lind was on vacation now, and there was nothing to do. In addition, it knew that it could not stay by Lind's side in the Muggle world all the time, but it was best to keep a little distance, otherwise it would look too weird. So when he got off the Hogwarts Express, Lind gave Anderson a vacation. Of course, there was still one requirement: don't be too far away from him, so that it wouldn't be there in an emergency. Lind got dressed. He came to the table and left some words for Felix, which said what he was going to do today, so that Felix would not worry. Then he tied a small bag around his waist. From today on, he had arranged the next time, going to the sea during the day and reading at night. When he came to the reef beach, he saw that there were still many people waiting here. Maybe it was because they had nothing to do on Christmas, so these people came to the beach early in the morning. As for what they came for, it had nothing to do with him. This was where Lind used to go in and out of the sea. Unfortunately, he came at a wrong time today. No, it should be said that it was not very suitable for him now. Now he would turn into a fishman uncontrollably when he touched the water. If he was really seen by others, he would be in trouble. After saying hello to a few people he barely knew, Lind walked along the beach. After a long time, he found a place where no one was, took off his clothes and stuffed them into the small bag on his waist, and then dived into the water. Chapter 45. Linda never thought that he would be so happy just because he was in the sea. The corals with different postures and the colorful offshore fish seemed to be greeting him. The crabs on the reefs on the seabed waved their huge claws at him. He always wanted to swim farther, deeper, and darker. 200 meters, 300 meters, 500 meters. In the future year of 2006, explorer Jun Neri broke the record of the deepest freehand diving at that time, 106 meters. In 2014, the record of the deepest equipment diving was broken, raising this data to 332 meters. Before the challenge, the challengers of these two records made preparations for several months or even years in advance in order to succeed. Even the time of the challenge had to be carefully selected to avoid storms, currents, etc. On the day of the challenge, these challengers jumped into the sea with the determination to die and stepped on the bones to successfully achieve these records. Now, Linda has easily broken these records. Seabed pressure, light obstruction, scuba, ear pressure, blood oxygen, all these are things he doesn't have to worry about. Lind didn't know how deep or how far he swam. He only knew that this was a depth he had never reached before. And all these changes came from changes in his body. In this lightless place, he can still receive the most brilliant colors. If he had a mirror now, he could see that his eyes had turned into blue square pupils. He just floated in the water. Then he saw an interesting scene. A squid slightly larger than Lind saw him. Perhaps in its mind, this unknown creature couldn't see anything here, and its thin limbs had no strength at all. Prey? No, food. Not even qualified to be called prey. Thinking of this, its limbs groped in the dark and wrapped around him until it floated above him. When the tentacles were about to wrap around him, he hadn't reacted to his crisis. The squid was more certain that its decision was correct. It can have a good meal. Lind looked at the big squid floating above his head. It has been a long time since the sea creature dared to do anything to him. Is it because it thinks it is big? Because it has never seen itself? Linda didn't know, this was his first time to come to this depth. But it doesn't matter. The larger the water environment, the greater his body size will be. He just looked weak. His biggest record was fighting a 6-gill shark of nearly 2 meters in the near sea last year. The fight in the sea was so fierce at that time. He was really not afraid of a squid that was a little bigger than him. Just when he was about to do it, he sensed through the water flow that there was a very fast guy rushing over from his left, and at the same time, there was a strong sense of goodwill on the person who came. In the blink of an eye, the creature rushed to Linda's eyes. Puff! The high-speed collision even formed a vacuum chamber, which made an explosion under the deep sea. The squid was smashed to pieces, and his 2 tentacles slipped away from Linda's eyes. Even Linda was pushed away by the water flow for several meters. Only then did he see clearly what it was. Blue-gray skin color and thick dorsal fin, with several light blue lines on both sides of the body. Their mouths are thin and long, and their appearance resembles a slender sword. A sailfish. Lind had seen sailfish before, but the one in front of him was different from any he had ever seen. It should be said that this was a huge sailfish. Even if you put aside its slender mouth, its body still reached more than 5 meters. At the same time, Lind could sense some of its refined thoughts, that is, this was a sailfish he could communicate with normally. You know, although he can communicate with some creatures without obstacles, it is based on the other party's certain intelligence. It is different from Tom Riddle's command to the small animals. Watching the blood and ink sac of the squid gradually faint in the sea, the sailfish smashed the squid into pieces and began to circle around Lind to slow down. Lind felt his kindness and did not act rashly. But looking at this sailfish was still a little scary. Sure enough, I am not a real sea king, so I should be cautious in the deep sea in the future. Soon, the swordfish circled more than 3 times, then returned to its normal swimming speed and slowly swam towards Lind. When it arrived in front of Lind, the swordfish opened its long mouth and nudged him intimately, just like a puppy. Lind felt its thoughts and touched it. No wonder. No wonder the swordfish hit it directly. You know, its speed just now must have exceeded 130 km per hour, but it didn't hesitate at all and hit the squid directly. Lind touched its pointed mouth along its head. Its mouth is extremely hard, and its head is also covered with a layer of hard skin. Such skin is not afraid of hitting a squid, let alone directly confronting some big guys. What's even more peculiar is its dorsal fin. Normal swordfish have a huge dorsal fin, but its dorsal fin is divided into 2 parts. The dorsal fin is split in the middle of its body, leaving a gap of about half a meter. This is definitely a magical creature raised by the fishmen. The back of the missing fin has soft skin. This is obviously for people to ride. Hi! A short cry sounded in the sea, but it was still clearly heard by Lind. You want me to ride on it? Lind asked doubtfully. The sailfish shook its huge body happily to show its affirmativeness. But Lind hesitated. Where was it going to take him? He could barely remember the way he came here, but if he let the sailfish take him around, he must not go deeper. His body could only adapt to the water pressure and move freely here. But he did not feel any malice from the sailfish, so he was a little hesitant. Lind confirmed again whether it knew the way here, and then got a positive answer. Let's do it. He was really curious about where this creature, which was obviously cultivated by magic, wanted to take him. This was the first time he came into contact with something related to magic in the sea he was familiar with. This curiosity and thirst for knowledge kept teasing his nerves. Lind sat on its back, and the dorsal fin, which was divided into 2 parts, guarded him in front and behind, just like riding a motorcycle. Lind grabbed its fin, and after making sure he was seated properly, the sailfish began to gradually speed up and headed towards a place he had never been to. When a whole dorsal fin is divided into 2 parts, its integrity will be much worse, but with 2 fins that can be controlled separately, its flexibility will be greatly increased. Just like when racing on the ground, the sound of bubbles whistled in his ears continuously, and his gills began to be unable to keep up with the water flow. I wonder if Bikini Beach sells helmets for racing fish? Chapter 46. Fortunately, this guy didn't go deeper, but stayed relatively horizontal, at least that's what the pressure he felt in his body told him. In this blue world, he sometimes saw the reefs below, beautiful animals and plants of various colors, and sometimes crossed a long canyon, which was a bottomless abyss. Sometimes he flew over the underwater mountains, and sometimes he seemed to fall into chaos, with nothing in sight. It may have been only half an hour, and the swordfish under Lind began to slow down. The bubbles in his ears gradually became smaller, and Lind listened to the chirping coming from nowhere and looked at the front. They stopped on an underwater mountain. The mountain has been leveled, and you can see traces of chiseling and axe carving in many places. On this flat land stood many spiral houses built of stones, most of which had collapsed into piles of rocks, and various shrimps, crabs, insects, and lice were wandering in them. On the hillside facing Lind, there are also many large holes. Some of the holes are sealed with nets made of unknown plants, but most of the nets have been broken. These holes are like animal pens. Is this a village? Fishman? Lind floated up and got off the back of the swordfish, and suddenly this thought came to his mind. The swordfish swam behind him, carefully avoiding its kiss, and then gently arched his head to signal him to go in. After Lind felt the swordfish's thoughts, before it could react, he swiped his hands and shot straight into the village like an arrow. When in the water, his speed was faster than some fish. Seeing this, the swordfish also gathered all its strength, flicked its tail, and flew in front of Lind and led the way for him. When Lind walked into the village, he felt the exotic aesthetics of this dilapidated village. Because the concept of up and down is not affected in the water, most houses have a door facing up like a chimney, and there are almost no streets in the village, because they only need to swim above the village to avoid most buildings and go to where they want to go. So most of the yards are next to each other, and you can see that corals, anemones, etc. were once cultivated in them, or strange and beautiful rocks, sculptures, etc. were placed. The sailfish led the way in front and Lind and it walked through one stone house after another and came to the center of the village. That place seemed to be the square of this small village, surrounded by some houses, and in the center of this square stood 2 rough tall statues, which were also the most intact things Lind saw in this village. One of them was a large female mermaid carved from a huge stone, which looked about 7 to 8 meters long. She was wearing a robe in the style of ancient Greek Athens, holding a 7-string lyre in her left hand, with scale patterns and a fish head totem on the body of the lyre, and her right hand was plucking the strings. Around her feet were a water monster with horns on its head, which was a grindalo. The other statue standing with her is a male mermaid, who is half a head taller than the female fishman statue. His majestic body stands upright, holding a trident, looking straight ahead majestically, and wearing Spartan-style armor with ancient Greek characteristics. Under the base of this statue, there are also a bunch of tentacles carved, some of which are stretched out next to this statue, just like his weapons. When Lind saw these 2 sculptures, he seemed to see a large group of mermaids floating in front of this square. Some of them were carrying children, and some were holding their own grindalo. Above them were various water monsters that they had conquered, such as killer whales, hammerhead sharks, great white sharks, and giant swordfish. The mermaids sang in unison, surrounding the 2 statues as if they were worshipping. Then why was this village abandoned? Whether it is for humans, fishmen, or any other race, abandoning their hometown is unacceptable. Moreover, he saw that this village had no signs of being attacked all the way. Most of the collapsed and dilapidated houses were caused by the erosion of years and water. Sigh. The sound of the sailfish came from one side. It had already swam behind the statue, signaling Linda to follow it quickly. It also floated and turned around twice to look at it in confusion. Linda put aside his doubts and planned to see where the sailfish was going to take him, and then come back to see. Maybe there would be more interesting things in the intact house. Linda also passed the 2 statues and followed the sailfish again. Passing the statue, Linda saw the only street in the village. The street looked about 4 to 5 meters wide, enough for many people to drive side by side. The sailfish swam to the street and lowered its body, as if walking on the street. It seemed that swimming too high here was disrespectful. Seeing this, Linda also lowered his body and walked on it with his feet touching the ground. Because of the buoyancy and his own control, he could walk a long distance in one step, so he was not left behind by the huge sailfish. This rather serious atmosphere made Lind curious. He looked forward and saw a street leading to a spiral 3-story building, which was much taller than the surrounding houses. However, its third floor had collapsed, and half of the second floor had also collapsed. At first glance, only the first floor was intact. After a while, Lind and Sailfish arrived at the gate of the building. When they got closer, Lind could still see the dense reliefs on the building. Even after a while, he could still see some patterns. There was an unknown fish head on the door. The swordfish stopped moving forward when it came here. It retreated to the back and nudged Lind, signaling him to go in. Lind took out the wand from his waist pocket. The nerves of the horse-shaped water monster were the core of the wand. It shook uncontrollably in this environment, and it looked very excited. Lind wanted to cast a spell in this environment, but unfortunately he still remembered the trace silk thing in his heart. He took out the wand just in case. He would definitely not use it if he could. Lind walked into the door and came to an empty hall, surrounded by different fishman statues and pillars. At the other end of the hall, there were several steps with 2 square stone pillars on them. There were 2 stone objects on top of the stone pillars, one of which was a 7-string lyre and the other was a trident. Seeing that there was nothing else around, Lind saw a staircase on the left, and then he walked up with his wand. The second floor was empty. The third floor, couldn't go up. Then only the thing on the first floor is worth studying. Linda walked back and approached the 2 stone pillars carefully. A 7-string lyre and a trident, exactly the same as the 2 statues Linda saw in the square. Chapter 47. Linda looked at the 2 things and walked up the steps. Green, let's go. Today we will start the magic. A fishman flexibly drilled in from the chimney-like top door, and his mouth made a harsh and sharp sound, because living in the sea, only this way of pronunciation is convenient for communication. He pushed open a door and saw that the room was empty, with only a huge and fat anemone bud in the center of the room. All its tentacles were rolled inward into its own cavity. At its mouth, a head was sleepy, as if it was woken up by the visitor. This is the bed of their tribe, a huge anemone. The fishman and the tentacles of the anemone were taken into its cavity together. The body and tentacles that entered the cavity were in close contact, which was particularly suitable for falling asleep. Still sleeping. Still sleeping. The fishman who came in was furious when he saw this, and swam over directly, put his hands on the soft and thick body of the anemone and began to scratch it. The anemone seemed unable to bear the tickling, and it vomited out the tentacles that were put into the cavity and the little fishman inside who didn't understand what was happening. The fishman called Green stretched and yawned. Well, let's go. He wiped his face with his webbed hands, said tiredly, and then swam out of the room. The fishman who came in was helpless to see him like this, and had to follow him. Green swam out of the room and swam over the village. The neighbor's grindalo showed his sharp teeth to Green, and it rushed up suddenly, and then was pulled hard by the straw rope around its neck. Green ignored him and continued to swim higher until he could overlook the small village. This is a beautiful sea village in the dark. Most people's houses are only 1 or 2 stories high. The only 3-story building is located on the west side of the village, but no one lives in it. Instead, it serves as a meeting hall for major events in the village and a place for young fishermen in the village to start their magic. The name of this small building is very simple, just called 3-story building. There are also 2 huge statues in the square in the center of the village, 1 male and 1 female. The female statue is the legendary ocean singer and the male statue is the legendary sea beast priest. However, Green has never understood what these 2 represent. It's just that the old fisherman in the village told them that they are 2 particularly powerful professions. Profession? In his cognition, there is no such thing as a profession. Most families in the village live a lifestyle based on the domestication of sea beasts, with men training and women raising them. What are you looking at? The fishman behind also swam up and looked at Green in confusion. Green turned his head and looked at his fishman friend. His name is Sea Dog, with iron blue skin and thick and hard scales all over his body. Huge eyes and sharp teeth. At the same time, fins are on multiple joints. All 4 fingers are webbed. And there are huge frog paws. This is very different from the beautiful creature on the statue. This is the image of almost all the fishermen in this village. Why almost all? Because Green is not like this. He has pale skin, and his thick golden hair floats and sways with the water. He has pale skin, and fine scales shining with blue and purple light can be vaguely seen under his skin, big fin ears, fins on many parts of his body, strong limbs and webbed hands and feet. His image is exactly what the statue looks like. Green shook his head and looked at the sea dog. Nothing, let's go. After that, he took the lead and swam to the third floor. At this time of year, they have to go there to start the magic. Starting the magic is something that every little fishman has to experience when he is 8 years old. It is more like a ceremony and a gathering. All fishmen of the right age face the statues of 2 so-called legendary objects in front of the hall, and then the village chief crowns them with seaweed rings one by one, which means that they are already big children and can start trying to tame their own sea beasts. According to the village chief, the magic of the awakening could once allow the fishmen to inherit the ancient and powerful magic of their ancestors. But since Green was born, he had never seen or heard of a fishman who had inherited the magic. The 2 of them passed through stone houses one after another, and gathered with the rest of the group of little fishmen. Soon, the team had more than 10 people. That was about it. There were only a dozen or 20 people of the right age in this small village every year. Several people crossed the center of the square and came to the street, then slowly landed and started walking. This was the rule of the village: no matter where you are, as long as you want to go there, you have to land here and walk over. Green walked in the crowd, listening to the little fishmen around him chattering non-stop. Because of his strange appearance, these little fishmen were unwilling to play with him, and he only had one friend, the sea dog, who came to wake him up. When he walked to the third floor, an old fishman stood in front of the door. Around them, on both sides of the street, there were already many fishmen swimming high above and watching them. Some of them were adults, while others, though not yet adults, had already undergone the initiation of magic. They chatted and talked about family matters. For them, today was a rare festival. As for whether to initiate the magic or not, they had no such concept in their minds. For them, they just had to walk in and pray to the statues of the 2 legendary objects, and then the village chief would put seaweed rings on them. As for the ancient and powerful spell inheritance, who would believe it? For decades, no fishman has seen it. Green looked at the old fishman in front of him in the crowd. He was the village chief of this village and one of the few people in this village who treated the orphan Green with sincerity. The old fishman had a majestic face. He glanced around and frightened the little fishmen so much that they dared not speak. Seeing them quiet down, the old fishman slowly spoke, and his voice was transmitted through the water. As the survivors of Atlantis, we have noble blood flowing in our bodies, we have wisdom that other creatures can hardly reach, and we are born with powerful magic in our bodies. And today, you will meet the legendary things. If you are lucky, you will get the legendary power. Although I don't expect it. At the end, his voice became lower and lower, and even revealed disappointment. He looked at the children in front of him, and their eyes showed casualness and indifference. They didn't believe what he said, but what could he do? This situation has not only happened in recent years. What power of ancestors, what remnants of Atlantis? They should be thankful that they know what Atlantis is. Their inheritance is like a candle in the wind. He has a premonition that as long as he dies, there will be no fishman who will remember his origin, his bloodline, and his inheritance. Thinking of this, he could only sigh and his body became more hunched. "Come in," he said, turning around and pushing open the door of the third floor. He took the lead to lead the children in. Chapter 48. After entering the hall, the little fishmen quieted down and stood in 2 teams. Although this room was not as magical as the village chief said, they knew the solemnity of this place from what they had seen and heard since childhood. Green did not like to be crowded together, so he naturally stood at the end. The door closed heavily. There was nothing on the first floor of the house, only various fishmen carved pillars, and on the other side of the hall were 2 tall square stone piers with a 7-string lyre and a trident stone sculpture on them. The village chief turned his head and looked at these quiet and solemn children, and a trace of relief finally rose in his lonely heart. Then they began to start the magic, but for them this might just be a simple and strange ceremony. The little fishmen walked to the middle of the 2 stone sculptures one by one, closed their eyes for a while, and then opened their eyes and were put on the seaweed ring by him in the disappointed eyes of the village chief. It was that simple. The sea dog was one in front of Green, and he was seen standing between the 2 stone piers with his eyes closed. Then he opened his eyes again after a while. Then he walked to the village chief and put on the seaweed ring, then walked out. He made a quick expression to Green, and then hurried out. Now there were no people in the whole hall, which made him a little nervous. He pushed the door open with all his strength, and then rushed out. Creak. The door seemed to be stuck, and then closed again. Just as Green wanted to step forward and start the magic, the village chief suddenly raised his hand with difficulty to stop his steps, and then sighed. Before he could react, he heard a voice in the hall. "Sorry, I wanted to wait for you all to finish before sneaking in." An old voice sounding older than the village chief. The transparent water in front of him squirmed, revealing two figures, one big and one small. This sentence was obviously said by the bigger figure. Their upper body is like a human, and their lower body has a fish tail, but because they are too old, their tail can only lie on the ground weakly. Siren, also known as Siren. Green remembered that the village chief had told him about these races, and that the tribes mainly lived in the Aegean Sea. He also remembered that the village chief said at the time that these were all compatriots. They all belonged to Atlantis. "Yusan, since you decided to do this at the beginning, why did you come out to disgust my eyes?" The village chief spoke slowly, and his soft tone was not polite at all. The old man Yusan didn't care about what the village chief said at all, but laughed. "Jialu, your mouth is still as stinky as shark meat. I want to ask you why there is an ancestor among the survivors." As he said that, he pointed at Green seriously. "Remnants? Ancestors?" He still remembered that the village chief had just said that everyone in the fish group was a survivor of Atlantis. "Tell me, Jialu, tell me how you made this guy." The old man Yusan looked at Green excitedly. "I have never done the so-called cultivation. He is a gift from God to us." When mentioning Green, the village chief also laughed happily. "You?" Green looked hesitant. "What survivors, ancestors? What cultivation, gifts, etc.? What does it mean?" It seems that this child has some questions. "Then let me tell him, how about it, no problem." "Jialu." Yusan looked at Green kindly. The village chief saw Green's expression, thought for a while, and nodded solemnly. "It doesn't matter whether it is said now or later." Seeing the village chief nod, Yusan also smiled and sat down immediately. The little mermaid who followed him before just lay on the ground and acted as a stool for him without saying a word. Seeing this scene, Jialu's eyes twitched, and he especially wanted to go up and beat the guy. Although it seems that everyone is chatting well now, people like Yusan will not come here for no reason. I guess there will be a confrontation of strength in a while. They, the merfolk, are sirens, and the Nagas living in the Eritrean Sea are all compatriots. You should know this, after all, you were not surprised to see me just now. Yusan said slowly, like an old scholar. Green nodded, he knew this. The Eritrean Sea is the Indian Ocean in today's terms, where the Nagas live. It is said that the land has already started a series of colonial wars. Merfolk, sirens, and Nagas are all survivors from Atlantis. As the name suggests, survivors means that we are the ones who stayed, and now Atlantis has been destroyed. And from the people of Atlantis to the survivors today, there have been 3 stages. Yusan said this, glanced at Green, and made sure he understood everything before continuing. It is said that Atlantis was once a human city on the sea, that is to say, as Atlantis, we were humans at the beginning. Human! Green screamed in fear, how could it be humans, that kind of greedy, stupid creatures? Yes, at that time, our ancestors' magical attainments were the best in the world, but due to unknown and unmatched reasons, Atlantis sank into the sea. It sounds a bit contradictory, but it is true, Atlantis, the most powerful city in the world at that time, sank into the sea for unknown reasons. But at that time, our ancestors were not powerless. After we were sunk into the sea, some people chose to leave Atlantis. But some people were reluctant to give up those advanced magic research, and chose to transform their own bodies, becoming what you are now. As he said, Yusan looked at Green with joy, as if he had seen some treasure. Is this called not powerless to fight back? Green didn't know what to say. It was obvious that he couldn't resist and could only accept it. Do you understand? People in that period chose the most advanced physical transformation at that time. If you have seen humans, you will know that most parts of your body are more like humans. This is the ancestors. As he said, he was a little lonely. We, the survivors, have gradually split, evolved, and degenerated in these thousands of years. And it's not just our bodies that have degenerated, but also the great civilization we have built. No one has been able to get those 2 things for many years. And to open them, the most basic requirement is to have the blood of the ancestors. This is also the sign that we are called survivors. Since no one could successfully initiate the demon 300 years ago, the concept of the remnants has been created. Do you understand? He asked Green gently. I understand. After the Atlanteans sank into the sea, some of them chose to return to the sea and turned themselves into half-human, half-fish creatures. That is, people like me. You call them ancestors. Then the ancestors evolved and split into 3 races after time: Siren, Fishman, and Naga. These 3 races are collectively called remnants. The initiation ritual contains ancient and powerful knowledge. But now the remnants cannot successfully perform the initiation ritual, so this ritual has become a formality like today, right? Green sorted out what Yusan said and repeated it again. Except for the last sentence, the rest is completely correct. What I want to tell you is that the initiation ritual is not a formality. At least not today. Yusan said with some pride. As he spoke, he pointed to the 2 stone pillars on the steps, as if he remembered the purpose of this visit, and stood up. The little mermaid behind him also stood up again. Then, he looked at the 2 stone pillars with fiery eyes. Jialu, I almost forgot my purpose. Although I am very curious about the method you cultivated this ancestor, compared with my purpose, this kind of trivial matter is not worth paying attention to. As he said, he put his hand on the shoulder of the little mermaid next to him. The little mermaid had dull eyes, just like one of his puppets. After all, I also cultivated the blood of the ancestors, although there were some small sacrifices in the process. But it was all worth it. It seems that the blood of the ancestors, he said, is the little mermaid next to him. However, his appearance is different from that of ancestors like Linda, so it can be associated with the cultivation he mentioned. If there was no ancestor, I would definitely not come out to disgust your eyes, and I would wait until you were all done before I came out. But now it's not possible. I must have both of those things in my own hands. I have already obtained the ocean currents ceremony kept by the Naga clan. My purpose this time is to obtain the Ocean Singer's Tide Calling Revelation and the Sea Beast Sacrifices Abyss Stone Manuscript. Chapter 49. Sea Current Ceremony. Have you been to the Eritrean Sea? Village Chief Jialu stood up. Hearing Yusan's words, his expression did not change. Instead, he seemed calmer. He moved closer to Green, trying to stand between him and Yusan. Yes, I have been there. They have turned into irrational beasts. Yusan said slowly, and Green felt there was a hint of unwillingness in his tone. Jialu, let's work together again. Now we can finally get these books that record ancient magic. Why do we have to be obsessed with the so-called Atlantis? The reluctance in Yusan's mouth gradually became high-spirited and changed into gotta be fanatical. The village chief finally stood in front of Green. He protected Green behind him and looked at Yusan with a disappointed look on his face. You have forgotten the blood flowing in your body. Yusan, let me tell you, even without the blood of Green's ancestors, I would not be able to hand over Tidecaller Revelation and Abyss Stone Manuscript to you. I would rather they are corroded by time. Hearing Jialu's answer, Yusan was not surprised. They had known each other for decades. They had conducted crazy research together and adventured in the depths of the sea in order to successfully enlighten the devil and obtain the secret book inside. Maybe you haven't seen the nearest Eritrean Sea. If you could see with your own eyes what the Naga clan looks like now, you would definitely make the same decision as me. Do you know what the humans on land call them? They say they are sea snakes, the nightmare of the sea. We now claim to be the remnants of Atlantis, but what about the Nagas? Abandon the people? Don't you understand yet? Atlantis is gone, and if we continue to focus on the past, we will end up like them. Yusan's tone became more urgent, and the water waves shook around him. Green could feel the powerful negative emotions in him. Jialu ignored Yusan's words and said calmly and unquestionably, you don't have to worry about it now. Now that Green is here, he can become the future of Atlantis. As he said that, he turned his head. He came over and gave Green an encouraging look. Future? Green was a little confused. He had not been very popular in the village since he was a child. There were only 2 people who were good to him, one was his friend Sea Dog, and the other was the village chief in front of him. Then now the village suddenly says that they are some kind of ancestors in the future of Atlantis. Although he was a little confused now, it didn't stop him from feeling a little excited. I used to be ostracized by children because I didn't look like a normal fish man. Some adults didn't want their children to be friends with me. Fortunately, the village chief comforted him and said, "Look, you look the same as those on the statue." This made him no longer have appearance anxiety. Now they are suddenly said to be the ancestors who are older than the survivors. Wow, that sounds awesome. Green looked excited and kept looking at the two stone pillars on the steps. The man known as Yusan just now also said that he has the ability to successfully initiate demons. Now he is particularly curious about the true face of demon enlightenment, which has been regarded as an ordinary sacrificial ritual in the village since childhood. Is it the Tide Calling Revelation and Abyss Stone manuscript mentioned by Yusan? Do they represent the harp and the trident respectively? There are more and more questions, and today Green feels like he has opened the door to a new world. But unfortunately now was not the time for him to ask questions. Jielu and Yusan were finally chatting. Yusan roared, "You still don't understand? We are hopeless. In nearly 100 years, our race has only had 2 spellcasters. Hope? Don't disgust me, I don't feel hopeful when I hear the word Atlantis. Don't you understand about Naga? We are abandoned, we are all abandoned. I don't want any nonsense like recreating the glory of Atlantis. I want to rebuild a sea city greater than Atlantis. I don't want to be the second fucking Poseidon, I want to be the first fish 3. As he spoke, the water flow stirred and collapsed inward, and Yusan's figure disappeared, leaving only the sound of a series of bubbles. The same was true for the village chief. He seemed to be passively pulled by some kind of space. The water in front of Green also stirred violently, and then his figure reduced to a point and turned into nothingness. Before Green could figure out what was happening, he saw the little sea monster next to Yusan swinging his tail and swimming quickly towards the 2 stone piers. Green was not a fool, although he did not understand the conversation between Yusan and the village chief. But he also understood that this little sea monster and himself were on opposite sides, and the goals of both parties were the inheritance in the magic stone pier. Don't even think about it. Green slid his hands as if he were equipped with propellers, and the water flow naturally pushed him to fly towards the little sea monster. Puff! The two collided and then rolled continuously in the air. As people from a fishman village, their children's entertainment activities were either duels or fights. Green grabbed the guy's hand and punched him in the face. But the little siren, who was as dull as a puppet before, seemed to turn on some switch after Yusan left. He stared at Green and let out a meaningless roar. His right hand firmly grasped Green's fin ears and tore them outwards. He didn't care even if his hand was dug deeply into his flesh by the fin thorns. Green had never seen such a method in his fights with other little fishmen before. He was a little panicked for a moment. He hit him randomly with his hands. Although he had some strength, he didn't hit any important parts. Ah! A sharp scream came out. Green let go of his hand, pushed the little mermaid away, and covered his left ear, where a large amount of blood was spreading to the surrounding sea water. The little mermaid directly stuffed a fan-shaped fin ear on his right hand into his mouth. Then, while chewing his ear, he looked at Green with an evil smile. Even though his mouth was pierced by the bone spurs on the fin ear, he still smiled, looking like a lunatic and a madman. Seeing his appearance, Green was also fierce and rushed up again. The two fought again in this hall. Green began to fight with his head, teeth, claws, and everything he could use. Gradually, the whole room was stained with a layer of blood. Ho ho! The sound of broken air intake sounded in the water. The two separated, only to see Green covered in blood, his nose missing, and only one eye open. He was looking at his opponent with a smug look on his face. The little mermaid opposite him was even worse. He looked at Green in disbelief, as if he wanted to kill him with his eyes. One of his ears had fallen off, and his body was covered with open wounds and blood holes. His blood was so thick that it was difficult to be diluted by the sea water around him. He held his left and right jaws tightly with both hands, where bubbles of blood were gurgling out. Although the mermaids were human in the upper body and fish in the lower body, they also had their own gills. This was also discovered by Green. The gills under the human body were different from his gills with scales and thick skin. In comparison, the gills of the mermaids were much more fragile. Green's left and right hands were now pinching a piece of skin and many gills. The gill filaments on the gills drooped weakly and could only drift with the current. This was torn off by him from the little mermaid. That's it. And it's still being transformed, haha. Green laughed happily when he saw the other party's hands fall down weakly and slowly float to the ground like a corpse. Chapter 50. Just when Green relaxed his vigilance, the little mermaid's tail flicked violently, and the whole body flew up the steps and landed between two stone piers. Green didn't react immediately, and just as he was about to rush in, he saw the corpse suddenly twitching violently. The overflowing blood seemed to be inspired, and a tentacle suddenly broke out of the mermaid's abdomen and waved wantonly. In panic, Green suddenly stood up, and his trembling body calmed down. What a poor physical transformation! A deep and hoarse voice roared from Green's mouth. Then, the tentacle that was still alive and well just now exploded into pieces as if it had encountered some unknown disaster. The moment this voice sounded, a large number of memories and consciousness suddenly emerged in Green's mind, and in just an instant, the personality of the fishman Green was suppressed in the corner of the sea of consciousness. The surroundings disappeared like a broken mirror. Linda opened his eyes, his square pupils glowing brightly. At this moment, he was on the first floor of a 3-story building, where the magic initiation ceremony was held. He was kneeling between two stone piers, and opposite him there was an old fishman made of flowing water. It was the village chief Gad. "What did you do?" Linda's voice trembled slightly. "He lost consciousness the moment he stepped onto the staircase, and only woke up just now. He actually knelt between the two stone piers without realizing it, and in his mind there was a memory of a fishman named Green from his birth to the magic initiation ceremony for 8 years. The illusory fishman figure heard Linda's question, slowly opened his mouth, and the fishman's sharp language vibrated out. I don't accept it. I want to know, if I had the blood of the ancestors by my side that time, would I not have lost? Let's talk about this later, you know that's not what I'm asking." Linda roared. He was naturally curious about what he said, but what he was most worried about now was not this. "Did you put another person's memory into my mind or use other means?" This is the question that Linda is most concerned about. When his own memory poured out the 8-year memory of a stranger, he was not sure whether his personality, behavior, and cognition would be affected by it. When Linda was 10 years old, he thought about a question. If his crossing was a soul crossing like a halfway takeover, then would his personality, behavior, and cognition be affected by the memory of the original body? His answer was, yes. At that time, he also sighed that fortunately he was a baby when he crossed over, without any memory, and there was no such thing as personality, otherwise he would definitely be polluted. As a result, this kind of thing happened to him now. The complete memory of a fishman named Green suddenly poured into his consciousness, which could affect him as a latent personality at any time. Hearing Lin's question, he was like a machine stuck, and he was motionless for a long time before he seemed to understand what Lin said. "I sealed a trigger spell on the magic stone. When the stone is summoned, the spell automatically starts, and the memory and personality of the comer are all blocked. Then take this clean soul into that period of history. In other words, you let me experience another life? So did I go back to the past or was your spell fabricating a memory?" Lin forced himself to calm down and think about it. At least the other party seemed willing to communicate with him. "No, it doesn't exist. It's just an illusory memory. The facts are a foregone conclusion. I am not a god, and I can't change it. I just can't accept it. Yu San defeated me back then and took away the Abyss Stone manuscript of the Sea Beast sacrifice. I kept the tide calling when I was dying. Then what should I do with this memory of Green Dot?" Lind was still in no mood to pay attention to what he said, and he only focused on his most important problem now. "You just need to accept it, or block it, or withdraw it. It's your choice. I suggest you absorb it directly, just like a big fish eats a small fish. Your soul is very strong, and digesting the memory of a carefree fishman for 8 years will have almost no effect on you. Block, withdraw." Linda rubbed his temples. After Jialiu said this, he understood a lot. His memory problem can be solved by using brain occlusion and forgetfulness spell. As for Jialiu's digestion of this memory, he must not allow himself to have 2 lives in his mind. Thinking of this, he was relieved, but the magic wand was still pointing at Gad's phantom. "Now I'm interested in listening to your story." Linda smiled. But he was not really curious about this story. What he cared about was that Gad said just now that he had guarded the tide-calling revelation and that he had the blood of the ancestors in his body. Does this mean that he may be able to get the tide-calling revelation? It was with this purpose that Linda decided to listen to his story. Hearing Lin say this, the shadow seemed to be more alert. After all, Lin's words should mean that he would not interrupt him again. "The true story, that is, the fact that you are not involved, Yu-san sneaked in with the little mermaid transformed by his body after the magic initiation ceremony. Then I found him, and we had the same arguments you saw. I wanted to rebuild Atlantis, but he thought the so-called Atlantis had been destroyed, and he didn't want our people to become like the Naga. He wanted to use the power of those secret books to build a city belonging to the fishmen, and to reforge the glory of the fishman civilization, rather than reviving. Then we fought, and I lost. I brought back to the Hall of Initiation, sealed one of the stone pillars with all my power, and attached this triggering spell to it. Then I ordered my sea beasts to find the blood of the ancestors in the sea and bring him here. He became more and more excited, and his illusory figure seemed to be disintegrating. His behavior of physical transformation, plundering, and stealing secret books violated the ancient doctrines of our various races at the beginning. Even if I die, I will not let him take away all the secret books. So the spell I left on the stone pillar was to see if I would still lose if I also had the blood of the ancestors. Did you lose? Linda asked, with a look of concern and eagerness on his face. I won. He looked at Linda kindly. With green here, I was very sure of what I did in the final battle, and I won very easily. After saying this, he doubted himself again, with a lonely tone. Tell me, who is right and who is wrong among us? Linda thought about the whole story. In the fantasy event, because of Linda's existence, Jialio was very sure of his decision, so he won. In the original history, Jialio did not have the blood of the ancestors around him, which made him doubt himself and made him a little shaken. Because from another perspective, although what Yu-san wanted to do was different from what he wanted to do, their purpose was the same. They all wanted to get the 3 tribes of fishmen, sirens, and Naga out of the bad situation of continuous degeneration. This also made him doubt himself, so he asked Linda this question. Who is right and who is wrong? Linda thought about it and gave his answer, as far as I see it, you are both right. You all care about the Atlantis family, don't you? It's just that you want to rebuild Atlantis, and Yu-san thinks that Atlantis has abandoned you, so he wants to get rid of the name of Atlantis and establish a new, powerful civilization. Hearing this answer, Gad's shadow seemed to have fulfilled a wish. You are right, in fact, I knew this answer a long time ago. It's just that I have never dared to admit it. You are still okay, if you only know how to say nice things, you can't take away the tide-calling revelation. As he said, he looked at the opposite side of the stone pier, which was the door of the hall. His eyes seemed to see through the living world outside the door. Aren't you curious about what state I am in now? Jialu asked. Soul fragment. Lin said uncertainly. He felt that Gad's current state was somewhat like the state of Voldemort's Horcrux. I didn't expect you to know this. I am indeed a soul fragment that was preserved when I was about to die. After that, Jialu fell silent again. Linda sorted out what he had just said in his mind, and suddenly remembered something. I have to ask you a few questions. Of course, Green. Jialu seemed to be waiting for Linda to ask. Do you know everything that happened in that spell? Linda asked seriously. He remembered an extremely terrifying thing. When the tentacles broke out of the little mermaid's belly. He blurted out uncontrollably. What a poor physical transformation. That sentence was not said by him. Chapter 51. No, I'm just the caster of this spell, not the manager of this spell. Jialu shook his head and continued to look around. He didn't care at all what was going on in this little fish man's mind. Can't. Linda still had some doubts about what he said uncontrollably. You can leave. Seeing that Linda didn't speak for a long time, Jialu issued an order to expel the guest. At the same time, there was a rustling sound on the stone pier on the right. As soon as Lin turned his head, he saw a book being thrown towards him. Linda grabbed the book and took it into his own hand. The cover of the book is made of some kind of brown biological skin. It should feel like some kind of fish skin, but there are no scales on it. The word Tide Caller Apocalypse is written on it in crooked fishman characters. If he hadn't had Green's memory, he wouldn't have been able to understand the words written on it. Trouble. This was Lin's first thought. The emotions contained in Green's memory may affect his behavior and cognition. This is what he doesn't like. But at the same time, Green's memory is filled with a relatively complete knowledge of the Murloc civilization, which is what he wants. If you successfully study the first chapter, you can be called the Ocean Singer. Take it and study hard. Before Linda could react, he was suddenly ordered to be expelled from the house. He only felt a huge blast coming from behind him. The thrust threw him directly out. Bang! The door closed again. Linda, who was thrown out, hurriedly stabilized his body in the water. The swordfish had been waiting outside for who knows how long, and happily came up to him. There were obviously many questions I wanted to ask, but I didn't expect them to be thrown out like this. As a soul fragment, I don't know what you will do in the future. Forget it, I will come back again. Linda sighed. At the end of the conversation, Jielu had no intention of talking to him anymore. He just kept looking at other places in a daze, not knowing what he was thinking. Afterwards, Linda looked at the book in his hand eagerly. Finally got it, this powerful magic book of Atlantis. Linda sat on the back of the swordfish and motioned for it to send him back. But he didn't know that not long after he left here, a figure rode the current and visited here again. Along the way, Linda forced himself to remember every place he passed and some distinctive terrains in his mind. Because he was in the sea, the swordfish would not keep turning, so he only needed to remember the distinctive terrains. Good. Almost half an hour later, Linda looked at the familiar underwater rocks. A large lobster on the reef is tearing apart a broken squid tentacle. Linda swam out of the swordfish's body and grabbed the prawn. Sailfish wanted to continue sending him offshore, but Linda refused. There are too many fishing boats, fishing nets and other things offshore, and this 5-meter-long swordfish is really conspicuous. It's better to swim back to safety yourself. After saying goodbye to the swordfish, Linda grabbed the big lobster and swam back. He had put tide collar revelation into the small pocket bag given to him by Professor Flitwick. The moon hangs high in the sky, and the tide has risen to the beach. There are no tourists at this time, and only the light of the distant lighthouse occasionally shines on the beach. Puff! The sound of water coming out of the water seemed a bit abrupt amidst the crashing of the waves, but the next second it was buried by the continuous sound. A figure jumped out and looked at the moon. The moon hangs high in the western sky. It's the Christmas holidays, the end of the month. Linda thought for a while using his junior high school knowledge. Hey! Fortunately it's just dark. Linda shook off the water drops on his body and waited in the darkness for his gills, webs, etc. to disappear under his skin. Linda, who was out of the water, was suddenly staggered by a gust of sea breeze, which made him shiver. Without the protection of the water body, he couldn't withstand the cold winter wind. Hey, you are the boss in the water, and I am the second child. Once you get out of the water, you are nothing. Linda complained, hurriedly crawled to a place without water, and then took out the clothes from his pocket and put them on. Stand up. 1 piece, 2 pieces. He wished he could wrap himself up like a Michelin tire man. Linda put his pocket bag into the lining of his clothes, checked if there was anything abnormal on his body, then shook his wet hair and hurried home. Lind. Felix's voice sounded along with a loud knock on the door. Today is the first day of school for you, are you up? Felix knocked on Linda's bedroom door before dawn. Click. Linda opened the door and came out. His hair was in a mess, his eyes were red and swollen with thick dark circles, which was even more conspicuous on his pale skin. Pack up quickly, I'll take you to London. Felix wanted to say something, but still couldn't say it. Oh, I'm too lazy to do it. Let's wait until we get to the station and use magic to do it. By the way, you haven't been to platform 9 3/4 yet. Linda yawned and said weakly. Don't you guys not be able to use magic until you get to Hogwarts? Felix asked in confusion. That platform belongs to Hogwarts, so it doesn't matter where you use it. Lind waved his hand, then walked back to the house and started to get dressed. After a while, Linda packed up, and then the two of them set off for London. Anderson lay next to him and continued to squint his eyes, and soon began to snore. All the way, Felix kept saying that reading is good, but it should be done in moderation. He should be like a child, hang out with friends more often, etc. He had witnessed Lin's obsession with magic during this period. Every day when he went out to open the tavern, he would basically meet Lind who came back from the beach. When he closed the shop and went home in the middle of the night, Lind's house was still lit. At first, he kindly reminded Lind to turn off the lights before going to bed, but then he found that Lind didn't sleep at all and would study until very late. But what he didn't know was that Lind didn't study until very late, but never slept. After returning home, he kept reading all kinds of books, and went to the sea to refresh himself and practice the tide collar revelation during the day. In the past, Atlantis did not set up various subjects like today and extended to transfiguration and spell learning. Conventional low-level magic is well known in Atlantis, but different forces or nobles will have some more advanced unique spells. Only those who belong to these families or forces can practice these unique spells. After Atlantis sank, in order to face the new life under the sea, the remaining family forces merged together to form a new council on the Ares mountain, stipulating that everyone must take out the secret arts without reservation and divide them into different professions according to the people who learn different secret arts. People who practice the secret art of the revelation of the tide calling are called sea singers. Jialiu told him that if he successfully practiced the first chapter, he would be considered a sea singer. And the first chapter of this book is a song. Let's go, towards the unknown distance. Follow the waves. Follow the sun. Chapter 52. He had never heard this song, but he had seen it. In the book Mysterious Atlantis that he threw in the corner of the swimming pool, after Bashir Elton boarded the white ship, Theseus once sang this ballad on the ship. Linda still roughly remembers the original text in the book. He sang a poem that I didn't understand at all. Its tune was so similar to the song that the waves and tides beat on the day we set sail. That ballad turned out to be the practice content of the first chapter of Tide Caller Revelation. This was something Linda didn't expect. In fact, he not only read it, but even listened to it. When he read this book for the second time, he was completely immersed in it. The messy lines on it interpreted different scenes in the book for him. During that reading, he vaguely heard that melody. But he didn't remember it. That memory was like an ordinary passerby on the street. He only knew that he had met him, but he couldn't remember anything about his appearance or height. The same goes for this ballad. Even if he just wants to hum the melody, it is so difficult. However, Tide Caller Apocalypse, which is written entirely in fish-human characters, has nothing else besides lyrics and pictures, no musical notation, no do-re-mi. But this is actually not the most difficult thing. He already has some ideas on how to learn this song. The real trouble is that he needs to be qualified to sing the ballad. Just like learning the animagus, learning this song also requires some rituals. He had also seen the specific rituals for learning animagus in the book Practical Charms 3, which were roughly as follows. First, hold a mandrake leaf in your mouth for an entire month, from one full moon to the next. Under no circumstances should the leaves be swallowed or spit out. As soon as the leaf leaves the mouth, the whole process starts over again. On the second full moon, put the leaf soaked in your own saliva into a small transparent bottle and let it receive pure moonlight. If it happens to be cloudy that night, you must find another mandrake leaf and start over. Pass. To the vial that is exposed to moonlight, add a strand of your own hair, a silver teaspoon of dew, which must be collected from a place that has not been exposed to sunlight or human contact for 7 full days, and the pupa of a ghost-faced hawk moth. Let this mixture sit in a quiet, dark place, protected from prying eyes and disturbance, until the next storm. While waiting for the storm to come, you should perform the following actions at sunrise and sunset. Point the tip of the wand to your heart and recite the incantation, Amato, Animo, Animato, Animagus. The wait for a storm can last weeks, months, or even years. During this time, the clear bottle must remain completely undisturbed and protected from sunlight. Sunlight pollution will cause the worst mutations. If you insist on chanting the mantra repeatedly at sunrise and sunset every day, you will feel another heartbeat at the moment when the tip of the wand touches your chest. Sometimes this heartbeat is stronger than my own original heartbeat, and sometimes it is relatively weak. When lightning appears in the sky, immediately head to where you hid the clear vial. If you complete all the above steps correctly, you will find some blood-red potion in the bottle, about enough to drink in one gulp. At this time, you must immediately leave for a spacious and safe place to ensure that the transformation process does not cause a disturbance or put yourself in danger. Point the tip of the wand to your heart, say the incantation Amato, Animo, Animato, Animagus, and drink the potion. If all goes well, you will feel a sharp pain and a pounding double heartbeat. You will have an image in your mind of the animal shape you will transform into. You must be fearless. It is too late to change your focus and escape the transformation you have promised. The first metamorphosis is often quite uncomfortable and frightening. Clothes and accessories such as glasses or jewelry will blend into the skin, turning into fur, scales, or claws and spikes. Don't resist, don't panic, otherwise you may be dominated by your animal instincts and drive yourself to do something stupid, such as jumping out of a window or rushing into a wall. It is not until the true first transformation is completed that one has learned the animagus. Of course, after practice, it won't be as troublesome as the first time. And the Ocean Singer's ritual is much more difficult than becoming an animagus. To be honest, when Lin saw the ritual recorded above, he really hesitated whether he should learn this spell now. The ritual process is very cumbersome, delicate, and extremely demanding. Any wrong step may cause irreparable consequences. Just like a rocket, it is extremely precise, including every part, splicing, purity of the fuel, etc., as well as the weather, trajectory, time of the rocket launch, etc. Any wrong step will cost you dearly. But if all this goes well, humans can go to space with successfully launched rockets. The same goes for this ritual of the Ocean Singer. If every step is completed accurately, the benefits will be huge. How big is it? The preface to Tidecaller Apocalypse describes the sea singer in this way. We have graceful and clear singing voices and angelic faces. Our strings stir the waves, and our songs carry the wind. We manipulate the tides and create waves. Ocean currents are our friends and sea breezes are our helpers. What we perform is not magic, it is art. It is indeed very powerful and awesome. And Linda looked up some spells recorded in the subsequent chapters, and it is true. They are all extremely powerful spells. This also made Linda feel itchy all the time. Of course, it has nothing to do with the phrase angelic face. So after thinking it over again and again, he decided to complete the ritual of the Ocean Singer as soon as possible. As long as he successfully completes the ritual of the first chapter, he can successfully learn and cast various powerful sea magics in the future. Speaking of which, Linda is still a little curious about what spells are recorded in the Abyss Stone draft of the Sea Beast Priest and the Sea Current ceremony of the Naga clan's Sea Current Singer mentioned by Yusan. Most of the spells of the Ocean Singer are various spells related to shallow seas, tides, sea breezes, etc., so what about the Sea Current Singer and the Sea Beast Priest? Where did Yusan go after defeating Jialiu? He should not have established a new Fishman dynasty, otherwise the human magic world would definitely know. And that Jialiu's soul fragment is not curious about the current development of the outside world at all. Could it be that he knows? It's not that Lin didn't notice these problems, but he didn't have the ability to do so now, so he could only keep them in his heart. He believed that according to his current development, he would definitely be inseparable from the sea in the future, and he had plenty of time to find out the truth of these problems. However, his current focus was to continue to learn the magic of Hogwarts, and in addition, he had to learn to hum the song. Humming the song was also part of the ceremony. At the same time, he had to prepare for the preliminary work of the ceremony. First, he had to make a musical instrument. Lyre was the best choice, and musical instruments were also one of the requirements for the subsequent spells of the Sea Singer. He had some general ideas about the ballad. In fact, it wasn't that troublesome, but it might be a bit risky. Go take the book to Dumbledore. Lind whispered. What Labrador? Labrador? Can your school keep dogs? Felix asked in confusion. He didn't hear it clearly, after all, he was just scolding a stray dog that crossed the road. Chapter 53. 2 days have passed since the Christmas holiday. After returning to school, the young wizards are extremely uncomfortable with the high-intensity study life. In addition, they still have a lot of homework to do, which makes them complain. After dinner, most of the young wizards return to the lounge. Of course, there are also many young wizards who are still wandering around Hogwarts. Some of them are dating, and some are playing. But there are also people like Lind. He walked down the stairs on the 8th floor holding a book wrapped in black cloth, and the crow stood on his shoulder to rest. If you want to learn the ballad, the best way is to read the book again. Then there are 2 methods. The first method is to read the book in front of a main professor of Hogwarts. Quirrell, Trelawney, etc. are not counted. In this way, you can read the book and ensure your safety to a certain extent. The second situation is to go directly to Dumbledore, and then explain the situation to him in a true and false way and read the book under his supervision. The problem with the first method is that there may be a big accident, so big that the professors may not have time to react, or it may have caused a serious impact after they react. The second method is that Dumbledore may refuse him and take the book away. Keeping a steady heart, Lind decided to give the book directly to Dumbledore, because according to Dumbledore's character, even if he is not allowed to read the book now, he will allow it in the future. As the strongest wizard in the magic world, he does not need to restrict the development of a small wizard. He went straight to the gargoyle on the 3rd floor. Although he did not know the password, it was still easy to guess. And based on the last conversation with Dumbledore, he was sure that Dumbledore had some way to monitor the basic situation of the school. Then as long as Dumbledore knew that he was coming for an important matter, there was no reason not to let him in. The password was never important, but it could filter out some people he didn't want to see. Sure enough, before Lind opened his mouth, the stone beast automatically made way for him, revealing the spiral staircase inside. I just don't know if it was the same last time Harry came. Lind didn't know if the stone beast had intelligence, but he still thanked it before climbing the spiral staircase. The heavy friction between the stones sounded, and soon, Lind arrived on the 8th floor. Welcome. Have you eaten, Lind? Dumbledore sat at the table and wiped his mouth. It was obvious that he had just finished his meal, but there was no food on the table. It should be the same as the long table in the Great Hall. I hope I didn't disturb your meal. I have eaten in the Great Hall, Professor. Lind greeted him and came to the opposite side of Dumbledore under the gaze of the portraits of the headmasters. I don't know why they didn't pretend to sleep today. Of course not, it's good that you have eaten. I remember that when I was your age, I often forgot to eat because magic was so attractive. Dumbledore smiled, opened the drawer and took out some candy as a dessert after dinner. Would you like some? Dumbledore asked. Then Lind shook his head to refuse. Only sugar can make me feel sweeter, so I like to eat sugar very much. I am surprised that a child of your age does not like to eat these. Dumbledore said with a smile without any surprise. It feels boring if you eat too much. By the way, Professor. The reason I came this time is because of it. Linda planned to get straight to the point and put the book on the table. Dumbledore used his wand to slowly open the black cloth wrapped around the book, revealing the blue cover inside. Mysterious Atlantis, I have read this book. It turns out that you are one of the people who borrowed books and did not return them, that Madame Pants said. Dumbledore said with a tone that caught Linda's pigtail. Although Linda felt a little embarrassed, he still said calmly, Professor, because I think this book is not suitable to be placed in the library anymore. Oh? Why is that? Dumbledore looked at Linda with curiosity, and his eyes were more serious. Then, Linda told how he and Jane found that there were multiple interlayers in this book. Then what? Dumbledore continued to ask. Then I became a half-mare man. Lind hesitated to tell his change. Another reason for saying this was to see if the professor who allowed him to enroll knew his identity. And after the Christmas incident, he was also a little confused. Was he the so-called Atlantis ancestors or a hybrid of humans and mermen? Half-mare man. Is it like eating gillyweed? Dumbledore was afraid that Lind didn't know what gillyweed was. His wand emitted golden red mist and outlined the image of a human who had eaten gillyweed in the air. Yes, it's very similar. But not exactly the same. Lind told the truth. What about Miss Devo, who read this book with you? Dumbledore asked. She should not have any changes, and because I was wearing thicker clothes, she didn't notice my changes. That is to say, this book, no, this story called The White Ship, has only had this effect on you so far. Lind nodded. Dumbledore's wand repeatedly tapped the book, and the book opened, became moist, then dry, and then was wrapped in golden light. There is no trace of magic on it. Dumbledore said playfully, and he also became somewhat interested in this book. No. It's impossible. Lind thought Dumbledore's playful expression was directed at him. Don't worry, Linda. Of course I believe you. It's entirely possible that there is some kind of strange magic in this book that I don't know about. After all, magic is a very profound thing. What I said is not always correct. Dumbledore comforted Lind, and as he spoke, he took out the book, opened The White Ship, and started reading. He read extremely quickly and seemed completely unaffected by the messy lines. Lind had been looking at Fox all this time, or at the cheerful silverware in the room. I heard that a few years ago when the principal of Hogwarts was about to change, the principal at that time would draw a portrait of himself in advance and put it under the table. Then he would let the portrait learn his smile, speech, and behavior. I don't know. Not true. Linda thought, looking at the table inside. I don't know if Dumbledore's portrait is hidden inside now. Just as he was thinking, Dumbledore's voice interrupted him, Lind, I don't think anything happened to me. When Lind raised his head, he saw Dumbledore looking at him seriously. Linda thought for a moment and then spoke. Professor, I think I can read that book again. You can observe the changes in me. Dumbledore almost blurted out, sorry, I can't. Then he seemed to remember something. Lind, are you sure you want to watch it again? Rather than something tempting you in your ears. Dumbledore did not ask Lind at all why. Wanted to read the book again, but confirmed with him directly. Tell me what you really think. Dumbledore's voice seemed to contain some kind of magic. Especially when I say the word yourself, it seems like the air is rippled. Linda felt a refreshing sensation in his mind. Many of his inappropriate thoughts were swept away, and his mind was extremely clear and rational. He felt that if he was given 50 intertwined headphone cables at this time, he could peel them off and separate them all. Yes, Professor. I had the idea to watch it again. Moreover, aren't you still next to me? Since this book only affected me, the problem may not be one-sided only with the book. Chapter 54. Dumbledore's blue eyes stared at Lin's face. He didn't want to read his mind, but judged the state of his words from the breath. You are right. Since the situation you described has not happened to others so far, then we should indeed go, try it. Dumbledore spoke very slowly this time. Obviously, he was thinking over and over again in his mind while speaking. But there is another question, Lind. Do you think this change is good or bad? Dumbledore was making the final confirmation. I can feel that becoming a half-fish man has no harm to me, but the benefits are not clear. Hearing Dumbledore's words, Lind was relieved. According to the current communication, he can not only read the book again, but also have the most powerful wizard guardian in the world. In that case, come on. Dumbledore also pushed the book in front of Lind. He is the pinnacle of existing wizards. Even if he is kind and gentle on weekdays, he will not be timid when encountering such things. Lind smiled in his heart, and without saying much, he picked up Mysterious Atlantis and turned to the beginning of the White Ship. My name is Bashir Elton, Inheritor. Before he finished reading the first sentence, Lind felt that the wall in his peripheral vision disappeared, the table disappeared, and the ink on the book turned into a vortex and sucked him in. His vision became completely black, and the sense of gravity given to him by the earth was completely lost. When he felt the light again, the full moon was hanging high, and the white moonlight sprinkled down like a veil. The waves beat on the reefs. He stood under the lighthouse, and a white sailboat was docked on the pier next to him. On the sailboat stood a big bearded man in a white robe. He asked, I want to take a trip, do you want to come? Lind became the protagonist of the story Bashir Elton. Lind boarded the ship just like that. In the office, Dumbledore looked at Lind quietly. His wand drew in front of Lind's eyes, but Lind's eyes did not change at all. Linda. Dumbledore called softly. No response, Dumbledore. A portrait of a Hogwarts headmaster spoke. He had a red nose and was a little fat. Shut up, Fordsk, don't disturb them. Another headmaster in the portrait, Delise Devanti, yelled directly at the red-nosed headmaster. Her voice immediately made the portrait, which was originally a little noisy, quiet down. Dumbledore also waved his hand to signal the headmaster portraits to stop arguing, picked up the wand and began to observe Linda's changes. Linda's body began to get wet, and he had been reading the page of the book for a long time without turning the page. Fish gills began to appear on both sides of his chin. The hands holding the book also slowly grew webbed. Fox, please ask Severus to come. Dumbledore looked at the phoenix and signaled it to find Professor Snape. The phoenix made a cry and flew out of the window reluctantly. And the changes in Linda's body have not stopped. And Dumbledore also observed Linda's eyes. The pupils became square, and the corners of the eyes were a little elongated. The spiral staircase began to make noises, but Dumbledore couldn't wait any longer, so he said directly, Linda. His voice carried many spells, which woke Linda up directly. Don't make noises, I have an appointment with Aristotle for dinner tomorrow. Linda rubbed his eyes, as if he was suddenly woken up from his sleep. Linda opened his eyes and looked around hurriedly, and saw a man who looked very similar to Theseus standing in front of him. Behind him, a bunch of people in the photos were whispering. Who are you? Linda patted his head, and he felt that he still remembered this person. Principal Dumbledore, is that you? The memory from who knows how long ago gradually became clear, and the memory of the white ship began to blur. At the same time, a man in a black robe, with a sallow face and a hooked nose, walked in from the office door. Are you Professor Severus Snape? Linda also gradually recalled why he was here. I don't understand why you are so hesitant to ask such a stupid question, which makes me wonder if you still remember what you look like. Maybe you should find a mirror to look at yourself now. Snape saw who was in front of him at a glance and said in a low voice. Mirror. Linda quickly raised his hand to look. As expected, the webbed palm grew out again, and Linda sighed. Then the goal of his trip. Since Linda turned into Bashir Elton, he has been reminding himself to learn the ballad hummed by Theseus. Even during the trip, he had sung the ballad by heart. But the memory of this trip in his mind has begun to gradually blur, and he is a little worried that he will forget the melody of the ballad. After opening his mouth and humming a few sentences, Linda was sure that he had not forgotten the ballad. It's a pity that he hasn't seen Atlantis yet. Linda is a little regretful. According to the development of the story, after enjoying Athens for a while, he met the Skybird and followed the Skybird to Atlantis. Unfortunately, he was awakened by Dumbledore while he was still in Athens. There, he also learned the more standard poem of the tides from the local bard. It was the ballad that Theseus sang, and it was also the song he had to sing when he became the singer of the sea. Fortunately, he had not forgotten it. How do you feel now? Snape's voice interrupted Lin's question. He looked up and found that Snape had grabbed his hand at some point and touched Lin's paw with his fingers. No discomfort at all. Lin quickly answered Snape's words. Then Snape pulled open his eyelids again, and a beam of light came out of his wand. How is your perception of light? No problem. Snape retracted his hand, and at this time Dumbledore stepped forward again. Is your thinking affected? Do you have any extra thoughts? Is there anything abnormal in your memory? His voice was full of magic again, which made Lin's head refreshed. Not at all, Professor. Lin said calmly, and at this time the fishman characteristics on him had begun to hide. But he didn't expect Snape to take out a bunch of potions from his pocket and stuff them into his mouth. If Dumbledore hadn't said that he could use a spell to test it first. When he thought he had escaped, he didn't expect these unknown detection spells to be so special. Snape and Dumbledore exchanged glances. In front of them lay a boy rolling on the ground and shouting. He's itching to death. Snape reminded in a low voice. Chapter 55. Dumbledore lifted the spell for him, and then sat back at his desk leisurely, with Professor Snape standing by. The itching on Lin's body finally stopped, and he lay on the ground gasping for breath. Huff, Dumbledore. Huff, intentional. He got up from the ground tremblingly, tidied his clothes, and heard Dumbledore speak before he had a good rest. Lind, what did you see when you read this article? These few times. Dumbledore emphasized his voice at the end. Snape picked up the book Mysterious Atlantis and scanned it. It seems that he was not affected by the book. Dumbledore had already introduced him to the current situation. I have read this book 3 times in total. Lin thought about it and decided to tell the truth. The first time, I was fascinated by it, but at that time I just felt like I was reading, and then I turned into a half-fish man uncontrollably. The second time, I felt that those chaotic lines seemed to come alive, some of them turned into human shapes, some formed waves or buildings. At this time, I felt like I was watching. The third time, which was this time, I completely entered the world of the book, became the protagonist of the story, Bashir Elton, and personally experienced that adventure. Linda became more and more scared as he spoke. According to this progressive level, if he read this book twice more, would he fall directly into the story of the White Ship and completely forget his original identity? Dumbledore and Snape also heard the seriousness of the matter and frowned. Have you ever tried to change the direction of the story yourself? Snape asked. Yes, but every time I have that idea, I suddenly forget it the next second. After I sank into this book, my identity of Linda began to become uncontrollably blurred. Linda looked at the book with some fear. Fortunately, he had achieved his goal. Learn Poem of Tides. Thinking of this, he hummed it again in his heart to make sure that the memories belonging to this part were still remembered. But fortunately, after I was awakened by the professor, the story of Bashir Elton's adventure was a little vague. Lind added, and suddenly thought of something in his mind. After listening to Lin's words, Dumbledore stroked the old wand, and didn't know what he was thinking in his heart, but it seemed that he should need more time to think, or he needed to discuss it with others. Anyway, no matter what the situation is, Lind should leave now. Professor, I want to learn brain occlusion. I think Bashir Elton's experience may have a negative impact on me. Lind quickly put forward his idea. This is what he just thought of. Since he was affected by the memory in front of Dumbledore, he can make this request openly. But what Dumbledore didn't know was that most of Bashir Elton's memories began to blur, and he wanted to learn brain occlusion mainly for the 8-year memory of the Fishman Green. He initially planned to use the Oblivion Charm to deal with this memory, but later found that if the Oblivion Charm was used, then the knowledge about the Green's Fishman language and Fishman culture, which were relatively rare to humans and integrated into daily life, would be forgotten together. So after thinking about it, he decided to learn the brain block technique to organize this memory into a folder that can be used at any time. This is also what he saw in the library. The practice methods of these advanced spells will not be released casually, but their effects are recorded in many books. Dumbledore looked at him with interest. He now felt that Lind was more and more like himself when he was young. For this book that he knew was problematic, he just read it and made decisions based on various situations afterwards. This is a good idea. I am indeed very proficient in this spell, but I think I may be a little busy in the next few days. You know, being the principal. So I don't know if the other teachers have time. As he said, Dumbledore looked at Snape with a smile. That's a good idea indeed. Occlumency does have some effect. If you want to learn it, it's better for me to teach you in the whole school. Snape smiled and looked at Lind. But it's not that easy to learn it. If you're just impulsive, I allow you to regret it now. I know I want to learn occlumency. Professor. Lind looked at him fearlessly. It was not surprising that Snape came to teach him occlumency. Unless he was the illegitimate son of Dumbledore and Grindelwald, how could a busy man like Dumbledore teach him? As for whether Snape would target him, deliberately make things difficult for him and deduct points from the school, he didn't care. It's good to learn real skills. This is the same as the master and apprentice in the previous life in China. Then you should be prepared. Snape said bluntly. After saying this, Dumbledore indicated that enough things had happened today and signaled him to go back and rest quickly. Until he walked out of the office, Snape did not clearly say when the class would start. It seemed that he would be notified later. After he left, Snape and Dumbledore talked about something, and soon after, Snape also walked out of the headmaster's office. After they all left, Dumbledore put away the book Mysterious Atlantis. This book will not appear in the library for the time being. At the same time, with Lind's reminder, Lind can enter the library again in the future. After doing all this, Dumbledore took out a piece of letter paper from the drawer and started writing a letter. Finally, he called Fawkes. Go and send the letter to Scamander. The Scamander mentioned by Dumbledore can only be Newt Scamander, the person who knows the most about magical animals in the world today. Although he had asked before, this time Lind had more obvious characteristics of blood curse changes, and he thought he could ask again. Dumbledore sorted out what happened during this period. The three-headed dog was moved to a different place for Harry to find on Christmas, and then some tests were almost set. But what he didn't expect was that Harry also happened to find the Mirror of Erised, which he didn't expect. He was thinking about using the Mirror of Erised to make some adjustments to those levels. Then there is the blood-cursed orc Lind. He seems to be unaware of the blood curse he carries, but that's normal. It's amazing that a first-grade kid knows about occlumency. It would be strange if he knew about forbidden spells like the blood curse. When should I tell him about this? Dumbledore stood up and walked to the windowsill to look at Hagrid's hut. The window of the hut was emitting flickering flames. I don't know what Hagrid is doing in there now. Alas! Dumbledore is not a god. He can't guarantee that everything he does is certain, and he doesn't know how things will develop in the future. Just like this time when Harry discovered the Mirror of Erised. These are some small things he can do without breaking his oath. Chapter 56. In fact, it didn't take much time in Dumbledore's office. It was still a while before curfew when Lind returned to the Gryffindor common room. After returning to the dormitory, he went to the bathroom to wash up as usual, and then he sat on the bed with the book The Call of the Tide in his hand. The lyre, also known as the lyre, is said to have been invented by Hermes of Greece. One day, Hermes accidentally stepped on something that could make sounds while walking in the wild. When he picked it up, he found that it was a tortoise shell with a tendon on it, which made sounds due to vibration. Hermes got inspiration from this, and later he used the tortoise shell as the base and covered it with cowhide as a resonance box. 2 ox horns were supported on it, and there was a crossbeam between the upper parts, on which 4 strings, tendons, were placed, thus making the world's earliest lyre. In the subsequent development, Tolpand, known as the father of Greek music, increased the 4 strings of the lyre to 5 and 7 strings. The lyre recorded in the book is the most commonly used 7-stringed lyre, which also echoes the statues seen in the Fishman village. Although the lyre was invented by Hermes in legend, people prefer to connect it with Apollo, the god of light and literature. Its sound is melodious, civilized, and quiet, which also echoes the Apollo described in Greek mythology. The description of Apollo in mythology is versatile, upright, and kind, the most beautiful and handsome god. The first step of the ceremony is to make a musical instrument. Lind chose to make a lyre, not because of anything else, but simply because there are notes on making lyres in this book. The first is to make the most important resonance box of the instrument. You need to kill a magical animal with your own hands and soak its skull with your own blood and sea water for a month. This is in line with the legend of Hermes making a lyre, and also reflects the ancient simple magic theory and the animal worship thought at that time. And at that time, Greek mythology often had heroic legends of hunting magical animals, the most famous of which was Hercules hunting the 9-headed monster Hydra. Although Lind still didn't know what absolute connection there was between these ancient myths and legends and the history of magic, he thought of them as soon as he thought about it. Lind stroked the book with his hands, recalling the information he had found about Apollo and the lyre. The sound of the lyre is melodious, civilized, and demure. Civilized and demure. If I remember correctly, it seems that there is such a creature that is about to die. As long as I appear at the right time, drive away the guy who hunted it at the beginning, and then end its life in the name of reducing pain. Then it will be considered killed by my own hands. But as an animal representing light, that is to say, I can't have any hypocritical performance in front of it, otherwise it will be aware of my bad intentions and curse me after death unless I learn the brain closure technique. To achieve the mentality of I really want to save it and the behavior of I will kill it myself at the same time. Linda stood up and looked at the forbidden forest outside the window, thinking of countermeasures in his mind. He didn't know how long he stood there. This was a very contradictory thing. There was a lot of room for operation but a small success rate. Until his roommates walked back to the dormitory shouting, he came back to his senses a little, and then lay on the bed and pretended to be going to sleep. Forget it, I still have to prioritize saving first. If I can really save it, I won't kill it. And I have to pay attention to Quirrell. Linda patted his head and smiled self-deprecatingly. His idea is not that of a Gryffindor. Forget not getting the head of the unicorn, Linda also has some other backup plans in his mind. The unicorn is relatively easy for him now. If he doesn't get it, he will choose something more convenient and powerful. The double horns of some creatures are naturally suitable for making lyres. For example, a certain underage dragon. Of course, he was not going to plot against Hagrid's dragon, but Hagrid's incident did remind him. In the plot, Hagrid's dragon Norbert grew very fast, and Lind might also be able to get a creature with a very short growth cycle to commit suicide. He had fed pigs and released sheep in his previous life. But he had never raised cats or dogs. He understood other people's feelings for pets, so he would not plot against Hagrid's dragon. But he could raise one himself and then kill it like a pig. Thinking of this, Lind really felt like a Slytherin. He didn't really care about life or death. Then, Lind gave Anderson a new task. Monitor Hagrid's hut and Harry Potter and his party. The plan for the resonance box had a rough outline, and then he began to think about the strings. The strings must be some linear objects with strong toughness. For example, the tendons of creatures, or the nerves of some creatures with extremely thick nerves. Although dragon tendons and nerves can be bought at the drugstore in Diagon Alley, they are all processed in various ways for the convenience of sale and preservation. I wonder if there is any way to contact the drugstore owner and ask for some fresh goods. If I send a letter directly, I guess the other party will ignore me. Or some metals or plant materials with high-strength magic conductivity. Thinking about it, Linda couldn't help but sigh. Making a lyre is only the first step to becoming a sea singer. The subsequent rituals are much more complicated, and the road is long and difficult. Thinking about it, Linda decided to start with the first step. Looking at the communication between Dumbledore and himself today, he did give himself a lot of freedom. But this does not mean that he can do whatever he wants. So for some details, he decided to be more cautious. At this time, the roommates were almost asleep. It was not that they fell asleep too fast, but that Linda himself thought too much. After waiting for a while, he got up and put on a black robe. With the help of Anderson, he came to the room of requirement with ease. Then he instructed Anderson to go back and monitor Harry Potter. This kid often went out at night, and he couldn't remember the specific time of the fire dragon incident, so it was best to start doing it now. After telling Anderson to remember to pick him up when the time was about right, he walked into the room where he practiced spells. He not only instructed Anderson to start doing it now when you think of it, but he also did it himself. He drafted a letter, which he planned to send to Felix tomorrow morning, and enclosed a sufficient amount of gold galleons. Then Felix would contact Diagon Alley to buy things, and then he would send those things over. In this way, the things sent over would not have serious traces of commodities, but family items. Just like you bought an inflatable. As a result, it was sent directly to the company's front desk, and the receptionist saw it. In short, safety first. He really didn't know to what extent Dumbledore controlled the school. And the characteristics of the things he wanted to buy were still very obvious. A polymath like Dumbledore could see the whole picture of most things from a small part. At that time, he would ask Felix to buy a traceless retractable bag in Diagon Alley and stuff all those things into it. This was also the safest way he could think of at this stage, although it was a bit troublesome. Chapter 57. It had been 3 days since he sent the letter to Felix, and Linda was leisurely waiting for the things he bought to be mailed. At the end of potions class this morning, Snape called him to go to his office to study potions class in the evening. It seemed that this was the time to learn occlumency in the future. During this period of time, Linda restrained his initial obsession with Tide Collar Revelation and returned to self-study of spells and transfiguration, but his progress was much slower than before. He felt that he would be able to complete the second-year courses on his own 1 or 2 months before the end of the semester. To be honest, this progress looked impressive, but in fact it was not enough compared to the previous one, but more than the previous one. Those who competed were Hermione, Snape, and others. Snape didn't need to say more. If Hermione's words were correct, the transfiguration spell she performed during her O.W.Ls examination was evaluated as being at the level of N.E.T.Ws. And Hermione basically took the exam in all subjects. That's not right, there seems to be something, a divination class or something that she didn't take the test, it seems because she doesn't like the teacher very much. He couldn't remember exactly what it was, but anyway, he felt a little frightened when he thought about Hermione's achievements in the future. After dinner in the Great Hall, Lind packed up and went to Snape's office. Standing in front of Snape's office door, he took a deep breath and straightened his clothes. I really want to forget something important. An idea suddenly came to Linda's mind, but he couldn't remember what it was about. It was like an animal's instinct for danger. After gently knocking on the door, Linda slowly opened the door and walked in. Came to this deep and dark room again. The disgusting and pungent smell of various drugs penetrated Lind's nose. There were hundreds of glass bottles on the wall shelves, containing different animal and plant specimens. Close the door behind you, Augustus. I remember I said that some herbs are not suitable for exposure to light. Snape's voice sounded sinisterly from the darkness. Linda quickly closed the door behind him. When he turned around again, Snape was sitting at his desk, where there were several small floating candles. That was rare light in the room, and those lights only served this range of things. Lind walked over and said hello to Professor Snape first, but was interrupted by him again mid-sentence, as if it was their first meeting. There is no need to say more polite words. You are indeed very polite and well-educated. This is not suitable for an 11-year-old person. As he said that, the wrinkles on Snape's face seemed to get deeper. It's like putting on a mask, which makes me a little curious. Snape's face seemed to be closer. At this time, Linda finally remembered what he had not thought of at first. In the original book, Snape directly invaded Harry's brain when he taught Harry Potter how to learn occlumency. If he did the same to himself. How could I forget this? Oh my God! Thinking about this, Linda remained calm on his face, but in his heart he began to think of some way to directly abort this course. To contradict Snape and make him lose the idea of teaching him. Or think of a way to turn today's course into theory, and then find a way to stop it. Linda was thinking in his mind, sweat sliding down his temples. Snape, on the other hand, continued talking. To be honest, if Dumbledore hadn't allowed you to learn this magic and asked me to teach you, you would never have had the chance to learn from me until you died. Snape said insultingly as usual. Augustus, although your performance in potions class is mediocre, judging from my interactions with other professors, you are not an idiot, so I hope you won't ask repeated questions about what I said. Do you understand? Snape looked at Lind. Oh, okay. Linda reacted and replied with emotion. However, Snape was not very satisfied with his slow response, and his speech became even deeper after that. You offered to learn this spell, so it seems that you have some understanding of it. But I think it's just something one-sided. Snape gave him a mocking look. Occlumency, as the name suggests, this magic can prevent the mind from being invaded and affected by magic. This also explains the most significant effect of occlumency. It can build a wall in your brain to allow outsiders to can't break in. Of course, this is relatively shallow. In addition to being external, occlumency can also be internal. Learning occlumency means that you can control your own memory. This means that if you have something that cannot be forgotten, you can use this spell to remember it firmly. Likewise, if you have any unpleasant memories, you can delete them. Of course, this is a taboo of occlumency. Because deleting memories violates the original purpose of occlumency. Occlumency was created to help wizards maintain their self during their magical journey in life. Having said this, Snape glanced at Lind and said, "Do you understand what self means?" Lind nodded hurriedly. This was basically the same as what he learned. One of the reasons why occlumency can prevent the mind from being invaded and affected is the control and organization of memory. Of course, this is one of them. This is also based on the reverse cracking of the legilimency spell. Seeing that Lind really understood, Snape nodded in satisfaction. Then he asked Lind, "How do you think you should practice this spell?" "Eliminate distractions, restrain desires, and concentrate," Lind said as he thought. "You have a lot of theoretical knowledge, but you haven't mentioned the most important point. The most important thing is to let go of emotions," Snape said. "No happiness, no anger, no disappointment, no greed, no jealousy. When you abandon these emotions, it will be difficult for others to invade your mind." "But Professor, no one should be able to completely abandon their emotions, right? And you and Dumbledore don't seem to be completely emotionless." Lind raised his question. Hearing his question, Snape smiled disdainfully. "For your first question, it is true that no one can completely block emotions, but the more you can be objective and calm, the fewer flaws you have. If you have a little brain, you will hear that I said very difficult instead of impossible. For the second question, to be honest, I didn't expect you to ask such a stupid question at first. Do you think Professor McGonagall needs to keep thinking about turning a toothpick into a needle? Do you think Professor Flitwick needs to chant slowly like you guys to release a clear spring? Most of the spell casting standards are designed to facilitate beginners to learn. It seems that you are just like that." Snape did not hide his contempt for Lind, but Lind really couldn't refute it. Who let him be the Half-Blood Prince? Remember, Augustus. Standards only apply to weak beginners. Chapter 58. Snape was right. The more proficient you are in a spell, the lower the standard for casting it. This is also the reason why there is the technique of silent casting in advanced magic. At that time, the so-called standard pronunciation and the trajectory of the wand swinging would limit the fluency of a person's casting. He even suspected that wizards of Dumbledore's level could already do most of the spells. Lind knew this theorem. But the reason why he asked was to delay time. It would be best to finish this class. He now felt like sitting on pins and needles, uncomfortable all over. "Augustus, you are very interesting. You haven't looked at me from the beginning to now." Snape looked at Lind, and his words scared Lind a lot. But he may have underestimated Snape a little, and he didn't expect him to say the following words. "It seems that you have some understanding of how to practice occlumency, but you can rest assured that I will not use legilimency on you." "I respect everyone," Snape said awkwardly. Lind was a little bit unbelievable when he heard this, and then he saw Snape's awkward expression. It seemed that this was not what he should say. Was it because he got Dumbledore's instructions? However, he didn't know that if it was Harry Potter in front of Snape, he would definitely use legilimency to force Harry to learn occlumency quickly, but Lind couldn't do that. Lind must have buried the accident a year ago in his heart and didn't want to show it to others. He told Dumbledore a few months ago that Lind might be the first blood-cursed orc whose soul was devoured in history, so naturally he couldn't use the Imperius curse to stimulate him again. But teaching him occlumency was an attempt by him and Dumbledore to resist the blood-cursed soul in Lind. There has been no attempt to use occlumency to restrain the blood curse in history. He couldn't be overstimulated, and he had to learn the brain block technique as much as possible, so Snape had to use other methods to guide Linda. "I think I have explained the theoretical knowledge clearly." Snape didn't care what Linda was thinking. "You can get out next, but from the moment you walk out of this door, I don't want to see joy, anger, sorrow, or happiness on your face. At the same time, you have to hand me a diary next week. The diary should write down some of the big and small things you encountered in Hogwarts, write down the events, and then objectively evaluate them from an outsider's perspective. Snape gave Linda a task and then drove him out. Linda was a little confused. The thing he was worried about for a long time didn't happen, and Snape actually said the word respect. He said goodbye to Snape in a daze and then left. When he pushed open the door, Snape added coldly, "Of course, you can choose not to write about things that are too private. But I hope you can give me a satisfactory answer next time." My God, this Snape is fake. He turned back to confirm that it was Snape's office. Linda sighed in his heart, and he felt that he was getting more and more confused about this magical world. Why did Dumbledore give me such face? Even Snape treated me like this? Linda buried these two questions in his heart, and then began to think about the task that Snape gave him. In simple terms, it is don't be happy with things, don't be sad with yourself. Always be an outsider. It's not very difficult. At least in the environment of Hogwarts where he is now, there is no separation of life and death. Most of the things are just fights between little wizards from various colleges. It is naturally impossible to have no emotional fluctuations, but it is relatively objective. Back in the lounge, Harry and the other four surrounded Neville and didn't know what they were talking about. When Linda walked over, he heard Neville crying. "Malfoy," Neville said in a trembling voice, "I met him outside the library. He said he was looking for someone to practice the leg-locking curse." As he was talking, he saw Linda coming over and hurriedly said to him, "Linda, Malfoy said he would use this spell to teach you a lesson." Hearing this, Linda felt a little disdainful in his heart, and the corners of his mouth rose. Then he thought of what Snape said to him, and then he returned to his expressionless face. "Okay, thank you for telling me, Neville. Go find Professor McGonagall." Hermione urged Neville, "Sue him." Neville shook his head. Harry and Ron looked at Linda with some expectation at first, hoping that he could teach Malfoy a lesson, and then saw Linda's eyes that seemed to have nothing to do with them, and they were a little disappointed. "I don't want to cause trouble again," Neville muttered vaguely. "You must be brave to face him, Neville." Ron said, "He is always domineering, we have no reason to be in front of him." "Where is he? Tell me, the last thing is not over yet." Jane interrupted Ron. "Last time? Jane, have you been bullied by him?" Neville looked at the little witch who suddenly jumped up with concern. "Last time, he was obviously looking for death, that day. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The important thing is that I wanted to beat him up a long time ago." Jane blurted out directly, but fortunately she realized that the last thing happened when she was out at night, and it involved the three-headed dog, so she quickly stopped talking. After hearing Jane's words, Ron also followed suit. "That's right, say it. We will stand up for you, we Gryffindors are not afraid of anything." "I'm too timid to be in Gryffindor." Neville choked up, Ron's words seemed to irritate him. "How could you have such an idea?" Hermione asked in disbelief. She pressed Jane down and covered her mouth with both hands to prevent her from saying anything like fighting. She asked Neville and glared at Ron. Neville sobbed and said, Malfoy said so, I think he is right." Harry reached into the pocket of his robe and took out a chocolate frog, which was the last one in the box that Hermione gave him at Christmas. Harry handed it to Neville. Neville looked like he was about to cry. "You are better than 12 Malfoys," Harry said. "The Sorting Hat chose you into Gryffindor, didn't it? You must have the qualities that Gryffindor needs. Where is Malfoy?" "In the annoying Slytherin." Hearing this, Linda touched his nose and was a little speechless. "I don't have the qualities that Gryffindor needs." Then he quickly stabilized his emotions. "Why didn't I realize that I have so many little thoughts before?" Lynn suddenly felt that the task Snape gave him was not that simple. Neville unwrapped the chocolate frog, his lips twitching, revealing a weak smile. "Thank you, I want to go to bed." "Harry, do you want a picture? You collect pictures, right?" After Neville left, Harry looked at the picture of the famous wizard, Dumbledore again. He said, "My first time was..." He gasped and stared at the back of the picture. "What's wrong?" Ron asked. Nothing, let's talk about it later." As he said that, he turned sideways and winked at Ron. Chapter 59. But obviously, Ron didn't have that comprehension. He looked at Lind with a puzzled look, not knowing what Harry was going to say. Instead, Lind walked away by himself. He knew what Harry was going to say. He must have seen the Nicolome on Dumbledore's card. At that time, Lind went to see it himself. The three-headed dog was moved overnight. It was thought that it had not left the school. In addition, Harry did not go home during the Christmas holiday. It was reasonable for him to find Fluffy again under Dumbledore's guidance. Then he would think of the trapdoor, the break-in incident of Gringotts' vault, etc. I just don't know if Harry is now suspicious of Snape. Seeing that Harry deliberately avoided him, Lind didn't make trouble for himself and walked away directly. On Saturday, Lind rarely walked out of the castle. He crossed the Black Lake and came to the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Not far from him was Hagrid's hut. At the same time, he blocked the way back to Hagrid's hut from Hogsmeade. Anderson rarely stayed with Lind during this period, but kept jumping back and forth outside Hagrid's hut and Harry's bedroom window. Not long ago, Anderson brought him a message. Hagrid went to the bar in Hogsmeade to drink. This also gave Lind some ideas. So he deliberately came here at the right time to wait for Hagrid's arrival. But he felt that he might have underestimated the alcohol consumption of the half-giant. It was not until the sky gradually darkened that he vaguely saw a tall figure appear in his field of vision. The moment he saw him, Lind went straight into the performance state. When Hagrid came over drunkenly, he saw a small figure wandering on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. He gathered his coat a little unnaturally, and then saw the little wizard touching the leaves and kicking the soil from time to time. "Hey, what are you doing here, kid?" As the guard of the Forbidden Forest, he still remembered his duties even at this time. The little wizard looked startled by him and said nervously, "Oh, I'm just here to take a look. I heard that there will be Bowtruckles here. I'm very interested in them." "It's them. Bowtruckles are very smart little guys. How did you think of coming here to see Bowtruckles? They rarely appear on the edge of the Forbidden Forest because there are always little wizards who bully them." Hagrid burped. A smile appeared on his face. The topic the little wizard talked about happened to be in his area of expertise, and he was in a good mood today. The little wizard looked a little disappointed when he heard his words. "Oh, okay. I just heard that Hogwarts is one of the few places in the UK where magical animals gather in a rich variety of species. I heard from seniors that there are tamed nightshades here. This is really amazing. I don't know which great wizard did it. I also want to see it, but unfortunately I can't see them." He added immediately, "It seems that this little wizard is very interested in many magical animals." "Ahaha, that's right, Hogwarts is the only place in the world where you can tame nightmares. And there are indeed many rare magical animals here." Hagrid laughed. The little wizard said, "The great wizard who tamed nightmares, isn't that talking about him?" Thinking of this, Hagrid's good mood doubled, and he said to the little wizard in front of him with great interest, "Child, if you are so interested in magical animals, I can take you to see them in the future." As he said that, he patted the little wizard's shoulder with his huge palm. "Really? Can you see unicorns? I also heard that there are unicorns in the Forbidden Forest." The little wizard looked surprised. "Of course, they often stay in the northwest of the Forbidden Forest." "Just say it like that?" Linda originally thought that he would have to talk for a long time. Unexpectedly, Hagrid didn't hide it at all. Linda didn't change his expression because he got the information he wanted, but continued to talk with Hagrid. During this time, he also learned a lot about the Forbidden Forest. The two chatted like this, and Linda had to say that people like Hagrid always have good intentions for most of the world. In addition, he is a bit nervous. Linda and Hagrid sat outside the Forbidden Forest. He could see the egg in Hagrid's arms through the folds of his coat. This also means that Linda did it too early. Wait until Hagrid's dragon hatches, grows for a while, and is found wandering at night on the night he was sent to Romania, and then there is a trip to the Forbidden Forest. Linda rubbed his temples. He really couldn't remember this vague timeline. But this is not a bad thing, it means that he still has a lot of time to prepare. It was getting dark, and Hagrid was almost awake. He suddenly came to his senses and realized that he still had a dragon egg hidden in his arms, but judging from the appearance of the little wizard next to him, he should not have seen it. Okay, it's getting dark, you should go back. I'll take you to see the Bowtruckle when the weather warms up." Hagrid patted Lind's shoulder. After that, he hurried back to his hut. Lind stood up, patted the dirt on his body, and looked up at the weather. "It's going to rain." I can't stand the rain, thinking, he hurried back to the castle. Lind casually ate 2 mouthfuls of food in the auditorium, and then came to the library. This was his first time to come to the library after borrowing Mystery of Atlantis last time. Although Dumbledore told him not to worry and that he would tell Madame Pants, Lind was still a little scared. Fortunately, Madame Pants was not at the door of the library now. She should be cleaning somewhere in the library. Lind walked in and searched for a long time and finally found 2 books related to fire dragons, Fire Dragon Species in Britain and Ireland and Guide to Raising Fire Dragons. Lind directly looked up the information about the Norwegian Ridgeback. He wanted to calculate the approximate hatching time of this fire dragon, and then calculate the growth cycle, and finally get the approximate time when Harry and his friends went to the Forbidden Forest. It was actually around May or June, the last month of this semester. Well, it seems that there is still plenty of time. After reading it, Lind walked out of the library and returned to the common room. Then, as usual, he got up after everyone fell asleep. But this time he did not go to the room of requirement, but came to the potions classroom located underground. Although he suffered a great loss in the 2 advanced spells of Wind Twister and Torrent, he still wanted to try this spell. This simple, violent, and powerful spell was created by a student. It was recorded in Advanced Magic Potion Making, a second-hand book signed by the Half-Blood Prince. Chapter 60. The Ilajo Cave opens. Linda waved his wand in a low voice, and a faint light emitted from the wand. Click! The lock cylinder was twisted open by an inexplicable force. Linda hurriedly opened the classroom door and rushed into the potions classroom. The pungent smell suddenly penetrated his nose. To be honest, he couldn't get used to this smell no matter how many times he smelled it. He came to the 2 solid wood cabinets in the corner. These 2 cabinets were filled with miscellaneous items. If his prediction was correct, the book should be placed in them now. Using the unlocking spell again, Linda first opened a cabinet. Among the cauldrons stacked up and down, one of them still exudes a lingering stench. There is no liquid inside, but is covered with a layer of brown dirt. I don't know what kind of magic potion it originally contained, or what it might be. It's not a magic potion at all. There are also brass scales with some deformed weights. There was everything, but he didn't see the book he wanted. Then he followed the same pattern and looked through other cabinets. Finally he found the book he wanted in a cabinet drawer. Advanced Potion Making by Libacio Polacci. The book looked extremely worn, with many cracks on the edges of the pages and curled pages at the corners. Linda opened the cover of the book, and underneath it was written in Zhuangzi's densely packed small characters, "This book belongs to the Half-Blood Prince." Linda did not rush to read the content of the book. Instead, he put the book into his robe and carefully put everything back in its place. Then he tiptoed out of the potions classroom and came to the room of requirement. The lock tongue seals the throat. The toes are used against a stick, which looks like a variation of the incisor match against a stick. The silent simplification charm of the golden bell was optimized by Snape, allowing Harry to successfully cast it on the first time, which is awesome. Close your earplugs and listen. Lind was flipping through the pages while praising him again and again. Snape is so awesome. Found it. Linda's fingers touched the pages of the book. Shen Feng Wu Ying. What I want is you. Lindy looked at the key points of casting this spell word by word. Snape wrote it in great detail. When he was young, his handwriting was small and neat. No one else, not to mention Harry, would have thought that this half-blood prince could do this. It's Snape. Lind waved the fake wand transformed by transfiguration while correcting his pronunciation. After practicing for a long time, Linda felt that he should be able to cast this spell successfully. He stood up and walked to the puppet. Shen Feng Wu Ying. The magic power surged out along the wand, but seemed to be blocked between the wands. Linda didn't care what the hell he was releasing, and directly put an armor on himself with his backhand. The puppet was hit, shook, and then stopped again. Phew. Fortunately nothing happened. The last wave of the wand was a little too hasty. Linda breathed a sigh of relief. Do it again. Shen Feng Wu Ying. This time it was even stranger, a stream of green smoke came out of the tip of his staff. Failed again. But this was also within his expectation. Even if talent factors are put aside, Harry's success in using the Shadowless Edge for the first time is inseparable from the foundation of spellcasting he has acquired over the years, his proficiency in controlling the wand, his control over magic, etc., which take time to develop. Effort. Linda straightened his posture again and raised his wand again. I should have started revising a long time ago. There are only 8 weeks until finals. Hermione said, sitting in the Gryffindor common room. After spending more than half a year together, Hermione, Ron and Harry have already formed a deep friendship, and because Jane has always had a good relationship with Hermione, she also has a good relationship with Harry and Ron. But Ron still doesn't know who the person who punched him that night was. Neither Hermione nor Jane said anything. In the corner of the lounge, Linda sat expressionlessly on the sofa. The sofa faced the corner. Linda had his legs crossed. There was a brand new standard spell, level 3 on his lap. Of course, his cover was Linda wrapped it with something else. A week ago, Linda officially completed the self-study of standard spells, level 2. To be honest, this was beyond his expectation. It seemed to be because he practiced occlumency according to Professor Snape's requirements. Just like a robot can always do better with standardized things, suppressing his own emotions makes him feel like a god when analyzing spell techniques and summarizing the reasons for failure and success. And the emotions that were usually suppressed would flow out like a torrent when he cast the spell, and his spells were much more powerful. Linda still maintains a confident attitude towards self-study standard spells, level 3. Although at level 3, the study of spells begins to deepen and is no longer limited to teaching you how to successfully cast a spell. The magic theories in the book are numerous and difficult to organize into a system. Linda is considering whether to encourage Professor Flitwick to compile a textbook himself. It would definitely be a much better book written by him than the one I am using now. But his confidence comes from the Charms Club, and the meetings every Friday are an eye-opener for him. The improvement of his horizons will be of great help to him in sorting out the theoretical system of third-level magic spells. The book that Lind had spread out had not been opened for a long time, and his ears were shining with a faint fluorescent light that was difficult to detect. This is a spell to increase hearing. During this period, he never stopped exploring the Forbidden Forest, and his relationship with Hagrid became much closer. Hogwarts' management of the Forbidden Forest is not that strict. In the original book, Luna would walk barefoot alone in the Forbidden Forest and make friends with many small animals. And Lind also went into the Forbidden Forest many times under the leadership of Hagrid in the name of understanding magical animals, and learned a lot of terrain. Now he has a map of the Forbidden Forest drawn by himself in his waist bag. After listening for a while, he found that either Hermione was calling Harry and Ron to study or muttering about what he didn't understand enough, so he thought it was meaningless and walked up. When everyone in the dormitory fell asleep, Lind put on his black robe again. Walk out of the dormitory. He was about to go down the spiral staircase, but found that there were 2 elongated figures in the common room below, and they looked like they were sitting in front of the table. Lind was not surprised by this kind of thing. Even in a place like Gryffindor where rough people gather, there will always be people who don't want to sleep every once in a while. In the middle of the night, they suddenly want to work hard and come to the common room to spread out a book to read, but they fall asleep directly in the common room. Normally, in this situation, he would just go back to sleep as a pastime. Today, just like usual, Lind was about to go back, but he heard a pleasant creaking sound. The hole in the common room was opened. Then Lind heard a familiar voice, from Jane Devo. "Stay away from me, you stink. Here, Harry, your invisibility cloak." "It bit me," Ron said. "I can't hold a pen for a week. Let me tell you, the dragon is the most terrifying animal I have ever seen, but looking at the way Hagrid treats it, you would think it is a furry little rabbit. After it bit me, Hagrid didn't allow me to scare it. When I left, I heard him singing a lullaby to it. This thing is really terrible. It hasn't been out of the shell for a long time, but it has started to eat a whole box of meat." Jane also complained, and it seems that she was not bitten. Lynn squatted carefully on the spiral staircase and listened to them talking. There was a slapping sound from the dark window. "It's Hedwig," Harry said, and hurried over to put it in. It must have brought Charlie's reply. "Charlie. It looks like the dragon will be sent away soon." Lynn silently calculated in his heart. Lind hadn't seen the dragon yet. Although he and Hagrid had a good relationship now, Hagrid didn't tell him about it. Maybe he thought enough people knew about it. Then, there were some rustling sounds below. "They will come to take Norbert away at midnight on Saturday. Let's go and tell Hagrid tomorrow. He still has 3 days to cherish. Although I really want that thing to disappear from Hogwarts now," Jane said bluntly. To be honest, she really doesn't look like a woman sometimes. If you enjoy the content of this channel, subscribe, like, and comment, to help this channel to grow.